who is sitting in the passenger seat. He already regrets the terrible words he just spoke. 2 seconds. Tyson sees something large and dark moving quickly outside her window. Imani's face turns to him just as she is enraged. After 3 seconds, the system crashes. Too difficult to feel and too many to count. It sounds too loud to hear. Flashes of light and darkness. Pain combined with numbness. Too much of both. Tyson awakens moments later to find stars through thick grass and cold water from the ditch soaking his shredded garments. The pain returns, and he realizes she is no longer with him. No, no. Tyson springs up from his cushion, gasping for air. The nightmare jolts him awake like it has for the previous 5 years. He feels phantom pains throughout his body. Memories of the year he spent in the hospital return. It took a long time of pushing through agony to get his body to function again. Once his hands could hold, he could move his arms, balance his feet, and stand on his legs. He leaned into machinery to alleviate his mental suffering with physical pain. He dropped a lot of weight. It felt like he was peeling layers away as he looked for a reason to keep going. He was taking on a new identity. But for what? His weakness transformed into strength, and he pushed even harder. He thought the pain was cleaning him, but it was actually an escape from his emotions. After a year of tough exercise routines, the therapist only allowed him to enter the gym for brief periods of time under supervision. This prompted him to specialize on bereavement counseling. He had to confront the anguish he had tried to conceal in agony. It took another 8 months before the doctors determined he was fit to return home. Oh, sugar, is that bad? Dream again. Her voice seemed both familiar and out of place. Tyson's heart constricted each time he heard it, but he remained mute. He had fought his way out of the gloom of the hospital. His keen intellect served as the foundation for his new existence. He would not give it up now. Imani was dead. She was gone. She wasn't at the foot of his bed, thin and fit in her silk nightgown. Her curling hair awaits his touch. Her milk cocoa skin begs to be touched. Her lovely brown eyes are filled with love and kindness. Tyson sank back onto his pillow, closed his eyes, and wiping his face. He ran through his equations in his thoughts. When he received the answer, he opened his eyes. She was gone, just like she always was. The physicians used a lot of strange terminology to describe his emotions, the crash, and his thoughts about his mother. Survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder were the most prevalent. But there were many others he couldn't recall. He never told the doctors about himself during his nighttime visits. If he had, he could still be in the hospital. It was easy to accept these situations and go on. Furthermore, his love of numbers helped him regain his sense of reasoning. She began appearing to him at night after he began pushing himself hard in his physical therapy sessions. As he laid in bed, his muscles ached. He had anticipated her visiting him from the outset. He understood he needed to keep quiet about it. He learned more about it when he returned home. He read a lot on how the mind copes with losing someone you care about, particularly after a serious disaster. His inability to accept her death, as evidenced by his cries when he awoke, indicated that his mind was searching for methods to fill the void in his life where only emptiness remained. His head was filled with images of her. Living with these visions for 5 years seemed like a long time. But like his preferred solitude and tight daily regimen, he sought solace in the familiar. Perhaps he wasn't ready to go on, as it always is following a nightmare. His thoughts drifted back to the night of the party. Tyson did not even want to go. Imani demanded they go, claiming they needed to show up because the man had been so encouraging. He was instrumental in Tyson's advancement to the position of advanced math professor at the local institution. That is what the man stated, at least. Tyson knew it was the dean's wife who had made it possible. The gathering commemorated the dean's retirement. Franklin Dunning was retiring and looked forward to a comfortable life in a beach town in a Central American country. Tyson, Imani, his colleagues, and their spouses gathered at his house for one more celebration before he and his wife began this new chapter in their life. Tyson wasn't sure whether this new strategy was what his old friend truly wanted. Ashley Dunning, originally Ashley Collins, had lived next to Tyson for as long as he could remember. They were best friends from kindergarten to college, until Tyson's mathematical ability led him to study with the best at many colleges around the world. When he finally returned, he discovered he had missed his best friend's wedding. He was glad to be home and that Ashley had found her true love. So he drank a little too much, tumbled down some steps, and wound up at the hospital where Imani works. She met the intelligent guy who couldn't take 5 steps, and his heart began to beat for her. On the night of the celebration, people noticed Ashley was missing, which was unusual given that she was normally the light of the party. Franklin made excuses for her and advised everyone to keep having fun, but it didn't feel the same without Ashley's vibrant personality. Tyson wanted to escape. He had never liked Franklin and did not regret that he had left the institution. Imani appeared more calm at this occasion than usual. Tyson suspected it was because Ashley wasn't present. He had detected tension between Imani and Ashley around 90-odd minutes before. Ashley stormed into the gathering, visibly angry and hurt. For a petite woman with stunning blonde hair, she made quite an entrance. Everyone could see that she had been drinking and weeping. Tyson exchanged a troubled gaze with Imani. Ashley shouted that her husband was having an affair with a young student. She had just returned from a detective's office with images to prove it. Franklin returned from the cellar with more drinks, just as the shouting began. The dispute was noisy and hard to see, and Franklin eventually stormed out of the house. Ashley fell, crying her heart out. Tyson went to assist her, while Imani ensured the guests left. The party was over, as was Franklin and Ashley's marriage. Tyson carried Ashley to her bed, her golden hair stretched across the pillow. Their eyes locked, and she kissed him, sliding her arms around his neck. For a little moment, he allowed it. Then he softly drew away, shaking his head. Their opportunity to be more than friends was over. Ashley looked aside and cried softly as he stepped into the hallway. Imani was waiting. He gazed at her, saddened for his pal. But then he noticed the rage in her eyes. She offered him a tissue and pointed to his mouth. He wiped his lips, revealing the lipstick. "She's inebriated. You are not. I am leaving." Imani spoke forcefully as she walked away and out the door. He instantly followed her, afraid of what she truly meant. He could feel her staring at him while they were driving home. "She kissed me unexpectedly," he whispered quietly. Silence. His rage began to swell. He had not done anything wrong. Yes, Ashley had once been important to him, but that was in the past. "What do you want me to do?" "I turned my back on a friend who was coming apart," he shouted. "Is she only a friend?" "The lipstick suggests something else," Imani answered, her voice stinging. "I told you she took me off guard. Her marriage had recently fallen apart and she was devastated. She sought out for comfort. And it had to be you," Imani shouted back. He took a deep breath, trying to be calm. "What have you got against Ashley?" "Oh, I do not know. Perhaps it's because she's pursuing the man who promised to be my devoted husband." She spoke coldly. "I've never broken that pledge and never will," he shot back as they sped down the dark road. He could hear Imani attempting to regain her composure. "I see how she looks at you at parties," she replied calmly but bitterly. "She does not know when to stop." It struck him hard. He felt as if he didn't know the woman seated next to him. He had adored the woman since they met in the hospital. He had sworn to be devoted to this woman for the rest of his life. They had been through both highs and lows together. Her 50th birthday was only a month ago, and 3 years prior, he had hoped to spend his golden years alongside her. He glanced at the road ahead. He questioned whether he truly knew her at all. His thoughts wandered to hospital gatherings and her co-workers' homes. He knew Imani was well-liked and respected, but when he saw men giving her looks, he felt a twinge of unease. Nonetheless, she always checked in with him at these gatherings and gave him a small kiss in front of everyone. He hadn't called her out in such situations. Why was she so angry with Ashley? His mouth moved faster than his intellect. "The difference is that I do not treat Ashley in the same way that you do with Dr. Devon Wilson." Dr. Wilson was the hospital's chief surgeon, tall, fit, clever, and single. He was the most eligible bachelor around. He appeared to be lacking in some skill. Tyson could see she was angry as she turned to face him. Her eyes, however, revealed something more. Was there doubt? Or perhaps guilt? Suddenly, they were on the tracks. "No!" Tyson yelled, pressing his hands over his eyes to drive the memories away. He needed to get up, start his day, and go through his routine. Patterns. It brought him comfort. Christy Taylor was having a rough day, despite the fact that Fridays are supposed to be pleasant. She frowned, and everyone around her took note. She knew she was lovely. She was fortunate to be born with attractive features, but she worked hard to make the most of them. She used the greatest face care products to maintain her skin flawless. To stay active, she kept a strict diet consisting of only healthy foods. She went to the gym to keep herself in shape. She also visited the salon once a week to maintain her long, wavy blonde hair shining and her nails in the latest style. Her friends felt she should become a model because she was attractive and tall, but it was not her dream. She looked at her hand to admire her deep red nail polish and noticed the diamonds on her engagement ring once. Looking at it made her joyful. Today, she felt nothing. Her fiancé, Blake Darlington, was handsome, fit, well-connected, and descended from a wealthy family like hers. But after 8 months of engagement, she realized there was no spark between them. There were no sparks. Even being near to him has not made her happy lately. Nothing in her life gave her joy. She maintained her looks and remained elegant. However, even shopping felt uninteresting. Christy was no idiot. She hadn't gotten this far solely because of her appearance and social status. She was intelligent and knew how to use her head. She was performing well in the majority of her classes and wanted to graduate at the top of her class. But lately, everything seemed less essential. She had to speak with her math teacher, Professor Haley, because her grades were slipping. She required the math credit to advance to the next year, but even the prospect of falling behind did not concern her. The emptiness in her life was removing the significance from everything. Christy had to maintain appearances when she knocked on the office door and heard a voice instructing her to enter. She entered a paper-filled room. Professor George Haley's office gave the impression that he disliked using computers. He preferred working on paper for his math issues, but not for student work. The institution required him to use digital tools, but he preferred to use paper wherever possible. Christy noticed a small, burly man with wild white hair and a huge beard seated behind his desk. He looked up and smiled at her. "Miss Taylor, how may I help?" he inquired, gazing at her. She twirled a strand of her blonde hair and asked, "Do you want to talk about my grades?" The professor nodded and pinched the bridge of his big nose. "Yes, your grades are dropping. If you do not improve, I will have to fail you. Is there a test that I can take to enhance my grade?" she asked. He gave her a stern expression. "Understanding the content will help you get a better grade. The upcoming exam is extremely crucial for you. You should have a solid comprehension of the course material by then." She frowned again, knowing she had struggled with the last few pages. "I need a tutor." "Yes, I was going to offer the same thing," Haley exclaimed excitedly. "I know a math genius who is a natural teacher and can quickly learn this stuff. You need someone like him." Christy looked at the professor with some skepticism. "Is he now at the university?" The professor gave a gloomy expression. "No, he is not here anymore. He retired early." He glanced directly at Christy. "You must grasp the importance of passing this course. You must persuade him to tutor you." He appeared to think hard, then smiled slightly. "I will offer you a letter of introduction, but you must persuade him." He took a piece of paper and a pen and began writing. "Why did he resign so early if he was such an excellent teacher?" Christy asked. "Curious about this mysterious genius?" Haley folded the letter and put it in an envelope. He wrote something on the outside and gave it to her. Christy's eyes widened as she read the name Tyson Kane, the man who stopped the terrorists. "Stop. Don't bring up that event or his role in it. He lost his wife that night and does not require reminders." He pointed to a painting on the wall of a large, bearded man standing with his arm around a gorgeous woman with curly hair. "All Tyson needs to remember is that he enjoys teaching. The letter will help you meet him, but you must demonstrate your worth." Christy looked at the professor, astonished and upset, and he looked bewildered. "Are you saying that I have to?" "What?" "No!" Haley snapped fiercely. Christy was now the bewildered one. Haley took a big breath. "You must demonstrate to him that you are determined and ambitious. Show him that you are not going to squander his time. He has no respect for folks who simply exist. Show him you mean business, and he will teach you. If he agrees, you will pass my course." Christy gazed uneasily at the envelope, sensing its importance. "Go meet him tomorrow." "Do you have any plans for Saturday morning?" he asked. She shakes her head. "Thank you, Prof. Haley." She replied, nodding as she exited his office. She decided to visit the library. She needed to learn all she could about Mr. Kane. This meeting was too essential to botch up. As the attractive blonde exited his office, George Haley sank down hard in his chair. He peered at the door. He wrote a letter to his friend Tyson, feeling bad about the lie. But he pushed the feeling away. A minor deception was worthwhile if it might help Tyson get out of his cocoon. Tyson's decision to become a recluse at 58 was a waste of his potential. Christy had no idea Tyson loathed aimless people and was on his way to becoming one. This made things clearer. If George believed in prayer, he would pray that Christy could persuade Tyson to come out of his isolation. George grinned. It didn't hurt that Christy reminded him of Ashley's younger years. His smile faded when he remembered Ashley, who disappeared the night of the dean's retirement party. Everyone assumed Franklin had done something dreadful to her, but they soon discovered she had fled the country. The next day, she withdrew the majority of the funds from their joint bank account and filed divorce proceedings with Franklin through a New York law company. He hurriedly signed papers, sold the house, and went into Central America's jungles. Tyson's best buddy had left, as had his wife. George attempted to fill the vacant space but could not reach Tyson. Perhaps Tyson needed a woman's touch, and Christy had plenty of it. Tyson stood barefoot on the grass in his backyard, next to a small patio set he only used for his morning routine. He removed his huge, warm dressing gown and laid it over a chair. He then went toward the lake, pausing at a little sandy beach on his property. He wasn't as discreet here, but no one had complained about his practice of swimming naked or sunbathing in the same manner. He had no idea if anyone was watching and didn't care. He got into the frigid water and walked till he was able to dive in. The water was freezing, but he pushed through the discomfort until his body adjusted and his muscles warmed up. With so little body fat, he needed to stay moving or he'd sink like a stone. Every day, he swam away from his house until he was tired. Then he'd turn around and swim back. If he made it back, he'd have a great workout and increased stamina. If he didn't make it back, it meant he gave up everything and was swallowed by the lake. Will this be that day? 3 miles south of the university town was a magnificent lake surrounded by dense forest. On the lake's northern edge was a 3-mile road lined with 20 small homes. The remainder of the lake was surrounded by steep granite walls. The north side featured a gentle slope and a sandy beach. The road used to connect to the town via a narrow, winding lane through granite rocks. There were no homes on that road, and it was now closed to vehicles. Christy drove her white Mercedes down the smooth road, which was built 4 years ago. It linked the eastern edge of town to the east side of the lakefront road. Christy found out about Tyson Kane's accident through her research. His car was hit by a train at an old crossing. The incident involved 2 troubled high school students who had been bullied by their peers. One was the son of a railroad employee. The other is the son of a construction foreman. They intend to retaliate against the town, which they believe failed them. They took an old engine and a flatbed car loaded with explosives. They drove the train onto an old track that led through the countryside and past the lake, intending to reach the town and blow it up. Instead, they collided with Tyson's car, tearing it in two. He was thrown from the driver's seat and landed in a ditch. The automobile went under the train, causing it to derail somewhat further east. Tyson's wife and 2 young guys perished, but the explosives did not detonate. Because it was a remote and lonely area with minimal traffic, no one witnessed the incident or knew what happened. 2 hours later, the student's statement was automatically put online, outlining their plan and why they did it. The municipal police were alerted and dispatched 3 cars to investigate. 90 minutes later, a cop discovered Tyson in the ditch, barely alive. That's when things really became bad. As Tyson was brought to the hospital, emergency crews discovered the train on its side in the brush further down the tracks. The 2 young men's bodies were mostly intact, but not entirely. A bomb squad arrived to disassemble the bombs. Christy read about how the local freight railway's owners, GE Corporation, got into serious legal and public difficulty. They had to pay a large sum of money to the survivor, Mr. Kane, and the municipality. DART soon began a project to remove the tracks from the branch line. Rusted rails and rusty wooden ties were pulled up and removed. Then road crews smoothed the ground and constructed a 6-foot-wide asphalt route from the crash site to the town's boundary. They refused to remove the rails within the town despite having town council authorization. Christy was using a smooth two-lane road built by these work crews. When it was finished, the town council closed the old lane to automobiles, making it part of the trail network, since it connected to the town's outskirts. The entire path made a 15-mile loop. Like any new enterprise, the town's officials get involved. They freed up enormous tracts of land near to the new road for luxurious residences. People who had already been living by the lake began to build large houses. GT still held the land south of the old railway line and prevented it from being developed. The agreements for lakefront land remained unchanged. Therefore, no new residences would be erected there. Christy investigated the man's background and discovered that he was a true math prodigy. His schooling was exceptional, and his job at the university made her wish he could still teach. Some people even referred to him as a giant, cuddly teddy bear who excelled at arithmetic. She looked at old images from the institution and observed how he built his reputation over time. He was 53 years old at the time of the collision and yet very large. She saw him now at 58, possibly requiring a walker or wheelchair if the injuries were as severe as they said. Still, all she needed was his thought to solve her current predicament. Christy shook her head as she drove by a row of large, elegant residences. The landscape around them was barren. She said they should have planted large trees, as in her parents' area ahead. She spotted the rail trail crossing the new road and noticed no one approaching. She drove over a little hump and entered the woodland. Soon she went onto the old lakefront road. Christy rechecked the envelope for the house number she wanted. Tyson's house was further down, so she continued driving, enjoying the scenery. All of the residences were on the lake side of the road, and several had gates, which she thought was foolish because they were open to the lake. Fortunately, all of the homes were one-story and blended into the natural surroundings. Some rooms were wider to compensate for the lack of a second story, as she noticed the numbers coming closer to her destination. She slowed and pulled onto a gravel road. There was no other automobile there, so she was concerned that he might not be home. The home was charming. It was a ranch-style cottage hidden among the trees, with numerous distinctive design elements. She almost expected to see supernatural creatures in the lovely gardens around the house before turning off the engine. She went outside and took a long breath of fresh air. It smelled so fresh and clean. She checked her clothing one last time. She dressed her best business attire, a red silk shirt, black pants, and low-heeled red leather shoes to match her top. She didn't want to overdo it, so she chose a top that didn't cling too tightly. She didn't have any unflattering jeans, so she chose black to make her curves less visible. She gathered her courage, prepared for her pitch, and climbed the 3 steps to the front door. She touched the doorbell and heard a faint ringing within. After a long pause, she pressed it again. Still nothing. Christy had not planned for this. She had a lot of ideas for talking to him, but none if he wasn't present. She stood on the front step and looked around. Perhaps he paid a visit to a neighbor. The fact that there was no car in the driveway or garage indicated that he was not home. Come on, you can do it. Do not give up. Christy could hear a faint voice to her left in the early morning silence. She noticed a single-story house next door with a rooftop terrace. An elderly woman with white hair was standing there, holding binoculars and gazing at the sea. Christy stepped down the steps and walked to the side of the house. She noticed a fence marked private, but she chose to pass through it nonetheless. The path led from the home to the backyard through a large hedge. Even though the hedge led directly to the water's edge, she could tell the home was much deeper than it appeared from the front. It must have been fairly large inside. She noticed choking and wheezing and turned towards the river. Someone attempted to climb out of the lake. He struggled to rise up, but then collapsed to his hands and knees, breathing heavily. She moved to help. When she heard a huge roar, she paused and watched him from the corner of the house. He stood up again. He was naked. He stood motionless, eyes closed, attempting to catch his breath. Once he was more stable, he went out of the water and towards the home. He ran his hands through his long black hair, squeezing the water out. His hair showed gray streaks at the temples. Christy wasn't sure what to do. She was there to see Professor Kane, not this fit-looking stranger. He was not big, but his muscles were well-defined. He had a small limp and scars on his knee. It appeared he had knee surgery. She struggled not to gaze at his body. He spoke abruptly, making her jump. "Who are you and why are you trespassing?" His voice was deep and aggressive. Christy walked away from the house. "I'm Christy Taylor. I am here to see Professor Kane." The man grimaced and approached a chair with a robe on it. He put on the robe, tied it around his waist, but continued to glare at her fiercely. "There is no one with that name here. Go away. Professor Haley told me that he resided here. He sent me to speak with Professor Kane." She spoke more confidently now that he was covered. The man's expression indicated uneasiness. "George? Haley?" "Yes. I have a letter from him to deliver to Professor Kane." She expressed hope. Perhaps this man knew where Tyson Kane was. She delivered the letter to him. He reached out his hand. She blinked at it before returning her attention to his angry expression. "Give me the letter." He let out a growl. She frowned. "No, I need to present it to Professor Kane directly. I warned you there is no Professor Kane here, only Tyson Kane. That is me. Give me the letter." Christy's eyes widened. She stared at him. He waved his fingers impatiently. You cannot be him." His face was confused. "What do you mean?" "Of course I can. He's almost 60. You cannot be that old," she exclaimed. He snorted before returning to his serious expression. "Listen, I do not have time for this. Give me the letter or leave. If you are him, why did you claim there is no one here with that name?" she insisted. His scowl has returned. "I stated that there is no Professor Kane here. That man died 5 years ago. I have not taught since then. He seems deeply worried." Christy's jaw dropped open. This was Tyson Kane, but he looked very different. She had to admit that he looked far better than in the earlier photos. The letter. She hurriedly gave him the envelope. He sighed heavily and opened it while reading. Christy couldn't stop admiring his body again. It had been a long time since she felt like this. Tyson unfurled the paper with mixed emotions. The writing on the envelope was George's. His eyes swiftly scanned the message. "Dear Tyson, I hope you're well. Miss Christy Taylor stands before you. She is in my class, and her grades have slipped dramatically in recent months. She's typically very brilliant, so this transformation is unusual. I don't know why this is happening. You may wonder why you should care. It would mean a lot to me if you could make some time to investigate what's happening and assist her. I owe her father a lot of money after a disastrous night of poker. He promised to let it go if I helped his daughter. I cannot amend her grade, so tutoring is your only alternative. I cannot exhibit preference, and I believe that only you can help her improve swiftly. Please you not disclose the gaming debt to Miss Taylor. I want her to believe she achieved her grades on her own. Thank you for considering it. Your pal, George." Tyson sighed heavily. He didn't want to do it, but he couldn't deny George. Despite Tyson's knowledge that he was a lousy host, George was the only friend who continued to visit. That was more Marnie's thing. He folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, waiting while he considered what to say to the young woman in front of him. "Will you do it?" she asked. He stared into her eyes and was about to nod. Has anyone ever said no to her? He maintained a straight expression. "I haven't had my breakfast yet. Tell me why I should help you." He escorted her into the living area and gave her a seat. He noticed her looking about with delight. It prompted him to look around, but all he saw were reminders of who was no longer present. His mood dipped. He proceeded to a tiny wood stove, which warmed the room, opened the door, and tossed in George's letter as it burnt. He returned to his guest. "I need to shower and dress. Then I'm preparing breakfast. Have you eaten?" he asked. She swiftly nodded. "But if you're making espresso or coffee, I'd love to have one." He grimaced and pointed to the machines in the kitchen. He never learned how to use them, but George had brought some special beans the previous time and made espresso for both. It works, but I'm not sure how you'd utilize it. Go ahead. Tyson left to shower, shave, and change into town shorts and a black t-shirt. He applied a dab of unscented balm on his painful knee. He took a big breath and strolled back into the living room. He noticed Miss Taylor using the espresso machine. It was functioning properly, so he thought she knew what she was doing. She turned and smiled at him. She suddenly appeared quite familiar. "This machine is excellent. Much better than what my parents have at home," she exclaimed excitedly. That sense of familiarity went with her exhilaration. I prefer basic black coffee, but Armani enjoyed espresso, he replied without interest. She smiled at him, and he turned to the fridge to prepare breakfast. He grabbed 2 eggs, some yogurt, spinach, and a few tomatoes while preparing scrambled eggs. He watched her use the machine. She brewed 2 tiny glasses of espresso. "These beans are really good," she exclaimed enthusiastically. He nodded slightly. George brought them over. She nodded and concluded. The espresso was ready. When I arrived, I did not see an automobile. "Did you walk into town?" "I don't drive," he stated plainly. "Because of—" "Yes." He cut her off. She paused. She moved the cup towards him, and he nodded. "Thanks. How do you get your groceries?" she asked. "They deliver," he said tiredly. He sipped his espresso. It was strong, yet good. He grinned at her expectant expression, and she beamed. That sense of recognition returned, but he couldn't pinpoint it. "You have a stunning home." "Is it the door to a second bedroom?" she inquired, pointing at a door near his room. "The majority of what was in there belonged to Amani." "Yes, but it is only for storage and where I work out." Tyson finished making breakfast and took it to a tiny table near the patio doors, where he ate while looking at the lake. Miss Taylor interpreted that as an invitation to sit between him and the view. He became irritated when she smiled at him. He felt forced and disliked it. "Did George tell you that I don't teach idiots?" He blurted something out and soon regretted it. "Yes, Professor," Haley replied. "I need to prove that I'm worth your time." Taylor continued her lecture as Tyson listened patiently while eating his meal. He found himself nodding at portions he liked, and she appeared to sit up taller as he did. Her smile indicated that she appreciated the modest compliment when she concluded and explained how her grade was slipping. He recalled what George had said about the mystery. He had to agree. This woman has numerous advantages. Nonetheless, her grades were slipping, and she did nothing to improve them. "Why?" he inquired plainly. Her smile faltered. She believed she had stated why. He clarified when he realized she was confused. "No, why are your grades slipping?" She fell silent, thinking about it. Finally, she appeared to have an answer. "My other classes are easy for me. I believe I am already familiar with all of the information, but this class is more difficult, and I will need to work more." "And you haven't put in any more effort since her gaze met his, and her smile vanished." He had a glimmer of despair, a familiar emotion. "Consider your blessings," he whispered, and her expression clouded. Her eyes burned with rage. "Listen, I know I was fortunate to be born into wealth and power." She started getting worked up. Tyson shakes his head. "No, it is a mental exercise. List the things you're grateful for." She blinked at him. "Are you evaluating my mind?" she inquired, recognizing what he was doing. He gave her a stern expression. "Whether I'm going to assist you, I need to know whether the issue is solely about the subject or whether it is also emotional. Each requires a different approach." He wanted to tell her he couldn't deal with someone else's emotional difficulties right now, but he remained silent. She nodded and reflected on her blessings, as he called them. Nothing specific, just broad thoughts. He clarified, and she gave him an angry expression. She cleared her throat. "I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful for my fiancé. I'm happy for the opportunity to attend this university." "Stop. You've just enumerated the most significant sources of possible happiness, people." "Which is not true," Tyson pressed on despite her shocked reaction. "Your parents. Is your father pressuring you to achieve anything with your life? Is your mother too critical of your choices?" he asked. "No, they aren't like that. They've been quite supportive." She responded abruptly, but Tyson sensed something in her look. "So they support something you don't agree with." "Let us move on," he murmured, making her angry. He didn't care. He had nothing to lose. He understood why George refused to amend her grade. Tyson was also attempting to maintain his integrity as a teacher, even though he did not want to return to teaching your buddies. "Do you have any phony buddies in your group? Someone you do not trust? Is someone acting against you?" he asked again. "No, I don't let toxic people get close to me," she snapped. Tyson nodded. "Then it must be the fiancé. Is he overly pushy? Not pushy enough? Has he harmed you?" "He wouldn't." She gasped, staring at him as if he were mad. "But he isn't making you happy?" Tyson inquired, picking up on her reluctance and making a guess. Miss Taylor got up and walked around the table. Tyson saw the slap coming but did not stop it. He had felt worse. Pain. Christy stormed out of the house and into her car before tears flowed. She didn't know why she was crying. She told herself it was because of his rude behavior, but she knew that wasn't entirely true. He had been correct, and she couldn't handle it. She allowed herself to cry for a moment, then gradually stopped. She couldn't quit or she'd fail the course. She didn't want to prove to him that she wasn't capable. She was capable. Christy got out of the car and collected her bag of books and notes from the back seat. She took a deep breath before walking back to the house. Be brave or go home. She marched up to the front door and rang the doorbell. Tyson opened the door, peering suspicious through the screen. I apologize for smacking you. His expression did not change. No, you are not. You had a reason. I was rude. She paused. Can I get back in? He sighed and moved aside to let her in. She approached the table and sat her luggage down. He frowned at it. I have not agreed to teach you yet. You have determined what is influencing my grades. Only part of the issue. Identifying it is a wonderful start, but you must also devise a strategy to address it, or it will continue to impede your progress, he said. I'm calling off the wedding. She announced, surprised at how nice it felt to have a weight lifted off her shoulders. Tyson lifted his eyebrows. That seems excessive for a minor issue. You could seek counseling for it. She shakes her head. It is not simply that. She reflected for a bit after making her decision. Other truths came out. I think we are too much alike. Our lives are the same. Our likes and dislikes are same. No difference equals no excitement, a spark of understanding. Being married to Blake may appear easy, but I believe I would become bored and seek stimulation elsewhere. He would probably do the same. He asked me to marry him. I became enthusiastic about the notion. But enthusiasm is not synonymous with love. It would be unfair to both of us. I examined the dazzling diamond ring on my hand. I enjoyed it a lot. With a mournful sigh, I removed it and placed it in my handbag. Can we start? I asked. Tyson smiled, slightly pleased by my determination. Did I mention I agreed to help you yet? He responded, and our gazes locked, my blue to his brown. You identified the issue, and I explained my plan. I will not let this derail my career. What else do you need? I spoke firmly and confidently. Tyson nodded, realizing I was serious, and his last out faded away. Tyson continued, All right, show me the last part you were comfortable with. He moved to sit alongside me at the small table. I grinned as I brought out my books and opened my notes. We spent the entire morning reviewing. He led me through 2 more chapters until he was certain I understood. You began to miss things here, he pointed out. I remembered it was a few weeks after Blake's proposal. Tyson, how did you know? I glanced at him, but he only looked interested, so I offered him a modest grin and returned my attention to the textbook. Tyson thoroughly explained the formulas and demonstrated instances. I wrote notes and felt the information soak in. A challenging problem drew my attention, one that previously frustrated me. Why can't they explain it as you did? It makes much more sense now, I replied, angry. He shrugged. Different teachers have different approaches, but math is math. Numbers speak their own lovely language. He examined the clock. Are you hungry? I nodded and smiled. I was planning to create a salad with grilled chicken. Is this okay? Tyson asked. I grinned broader and nodded again. Do these 3 practice questions while I prepare lunch? He said, pointing to the textbook. Yes, sir, I replied with a grin as Tyson entered the kitchen. I started with the questions. I completed the first 2, then my thoughts drifted. I could not believe he was 58. He looked wonderful as he walked out of the lake, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. What concerns you about the 3rd question? He asked, breaking my thoughts. Sorry. What? He frowned. I asked, what's bothering you about the 3rd one? Nothing. I just got preoccupied, I explained. He arched an eyebrow and handed me a lunch plate while I answered the last question. When I was finished, he verified my work to ensure I understood. It appears that you have this under control. After lunch, we'll work on the next 4 chapters. You are doing well. So there was only a misunderstanding before? No. I don't think you realize how much your teaching style helps, I insisted. I'm not a teacher anymore. That is a shame. If you need my assistance this afternoon, please drop it. I lifted my hands in surrender. We began eating, and the salad impressed me. The chicken was hot and peppery, a fantastic match for the chili dress. It's like spicy chicken wings with a creamy dressing. He smiled. Secret recipe. After some peaceful munching, I couldn't help but inquire, "If you don't drive, do you go out for anything other than a morning swim?" He gave me a long look before answering. "I take a walk every day. I will go after we finish the 4th chapter." "Where do you walk?" I asked. "I walk 6 miles down the lakefront road and back. I keep my gym clothing in my car. May I join you today?" I asked. He stared at me, sensing my hope. He felt dubious, but eventually consented. "Fine." I looked around and counted the photos of Tyson and his wife. "You have a lot of photographs. You've changed so much." He looked around and shrugged. As previously said, the man in those photos died that night. Everything he valued has died. I'm not Professor Kane anymore. I'm just Tyson Kane. Is mathematics important? Tyson froze and stared into my eyes, daring him to change his remarks. "Let us finish instructing," he remarked stiffly. We spent the next 3 hours reading 4 more chapters. I took extensive notes and asked a lot of questions. Tyson stayed cool and helpful as we completed the final chapter. I closed my journal with a satisfied sigh. I now have more knowledge. We even completed a chapter beyond what the institution was teaching. I understand the procedures and formulas. I'm going to ace my next test. I can feel it. Thank you very much. He gave a nod and glanced aside. His expression was worried. "Are we ready for our walk?" Christy asked. He stood and stretched. She couldn't stop admiring his tummy muscles. "Yes, I simply need to change. Let me put my books away and get my exercise gear," she said, leaping from her chair. She hurriedly gathered her books and dashed outside. She switched luggage in the car and returned her duffel bag. "You can change in the guest bathroom," he explained. She grinned and walked inside. She grinned as the door closed. He had no idea what was going to happen. Tyson watched the restroom door close and pondered how he had landed up in this situation. It was George's fault for sending her here. She was really lovely, and her attire suggested a well-kept figure. He frowned. Realizing she was young enough to be his daughter, perhaps even his granddaughter, she tried to forget it. He walked into his bedroom and put on his running tights. His knee hurt, so no running. Today, he put on ankle socks, went to the living room, secured the patio doors, and took his keys. He sat near the front door, putting on his runners. He heard a noise and looked up. He froze as she approached him. Her bright runners and yoga pants highlighted her lean physique. The leggings had bright parrot feathers from ankle to knee and leopard pattern that ran up her thighs to her sports bra. Her stomach muscles were apparent, and she smiled broadly. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail. "That's quite the attire. Do you like it?" "This is my first time wearing it," she whispered, moving her hands across the silk. Tyson felt odd about his excitement for her. It was strange to feel this way about someone so young. "Yes, I mean, it is extremely good." "You look nice." Tyson suggested that we go and look elsewhere. She walked out with a happy smile, and his gaze shifted to her lower back. He admired her, but instantly stopped himself. He looked up and noticed her looking at him. 2. She blushed when he caught her. Her eyes widened slightly as she noticed his growing curiosity. Tyson attempted to act normal as they strolled along the street. He went left and Christy walked with him. He saw her happy expression and grimaced, perplexed. "Isn't a gym a better place to work out? And folks your age will enjoy your new attire more." She bit her lip to conceal her smile before shaking her head. "The gym becomes dull." She smiled and continued. "It's nice to be outside sometimes. Also, you are in better shape than everyone else at our gym." He was astonished, but she nodded. "You are pretty fit for someone nearly 60, he said. She raised her hands. "No, you look fantastic. I do not view you as old at all." They strolled in quiet as he considered what she had said. He felt flattered, but reminded himself that he was older. She had a full life ahead of her. They came to the end of the road near the old train crossing. Tyson paused, reflecting on the odd happenings of that night. "Is this the place?" Christy asked quietly. He nodded and proceeded east, pointing to where they discovered him following the crash. They came to a stone with a man's name on it. It wasn't her grave, but the municipality had placed it here to honor her. Tyson continued moving. Begin a light jog to leave the memories behind. The pain in his knee was bearable. Christy jogged alongside him, watching him. He glanced over and she gave him a sympathetic grin. "Please don't." "Sorry," she whispered. They jogged until Tyson was forced to walk because his knee hurt. "What is wrong with your knee?" she asked. "It requires replacement." He spoke gruffly. "I've heard it's a common surgery these days," she offered. He nodded, but said nothing more. He was more afraid of the drive to the hospital than of the surgery. A psychologist had informed him that he could conquer it with therapy, but he hadn't returned since leaving the hospital. Tyson felt like his life was paused. "I can give you a ride if you like." "No, I apologize. No, I do not drive or ride in cars," Tyson insisted. She became silent again, and he tried not to look at her, but he couldn't. She was not disappointed. She felt bad for him. That felt terrible. "Do not listen. I don't need to be pitied." "I don't want it," he responded, his voice wavering. He fell silent. They walked down the tree-lined street, taking in the natural beauty around them. If you had to pick a place to stay, you did well. "It's nice here," Christy murmured quietly. Tyson looked angry at her, but she refused to back down. He attempted to speak, but nothing came out. He attempted to run, but his knee hurt, forcing him to walk again. She walked with him till they reached the lakeside road's end. They turned back. Christy surveyed the houses along the way. "How much does each of these houses cost?" she asked. He laughed. "You cannot purchase them, even if you wanted to." "You cannot." When she looked confused, he explained who owned the land. "We cannot modify the residences or pave the driveways. We lease the houses and can transfer the lease to a family member. The original proprietors of Gart desired family residences. There's a lot of money invested in this land. The lease expires after 60 years. Then one of two things will occur. GR may kick everyone out and sell the land for $1 million. Small houses will be replaced by large mansions." "What are the other options?" she asked. "Some say GR will lease it back to the current owners with the same terms." He saw her astonished expression. Everything was okay between the local government and GR until the accident and lawsuit. The council attempted to take the area surrounding the lake and forest. Instead, they received a new road for their new development. This exacerbated their conflict with GR, who was both dumb and greedy. "So the houses I saw earlier are largely owned by town council members," he explained bitterly. They strolled on in quiet for a while. Christy is deep in thought. Blake's mother serves on the municipal council while his father is a real estate developer. She finally admitted that he saw the fear in her eyes and simply shrugged. It was better she knew now than later when they returned to his apartment. Tyson's knee stung terribly. He shouldn't have tried to run. He noticed his neighbor, Mrs. Willoughby, working on a flower bush. He remembered she preferred to be addressed by her first name. "Good afternoon, Barbara." She looked up, her smile widening as she noticed Christy. "Good afternoon, Tyson. It's nice to see you in such beautiful company." He exhaled. "This is Christy Taylor. She attends a local institution, and George has requested me to help her with arithmetic. Christy, this is my neighbor, Barbara Willoughby." Christy clasped hands with Barbara and exchanged grins. Barbara said, "I'm so glad you're teaching again. He's an incredible teacher. He helped me understand everything, and now I'm confident I'll pass my finals." Christy agreed just as enthusiastically. Tyson gave both women a disgruntled expression while they smiled at him. "I'm not returning to teaching." "This was only a favor for George." Barbara pouted. "That'd be a shame. You're incredibly talented." "That's my choice," he stated firmly. The women exchanged glances before Tyson was done. "Have a nice evening, Barbara," he remarked as he walked up his driveway. He heard Christy say goodbye and followed him. He opened and held the door for her. He saw Barbara still watching, so he waved before entering. He bolted the door and heard Christy's voice behind him. He turned and froze as she relaxed, pulling off her shoes and stretching her arms. "What? What are you doing now?" he asked. She grinned at him, simply getting comfy. She sat down on the couch and said, "Thanks for all of your help today." He gazed at her with mixed emotions. "You cannot merely." She came closer and grinned. "I believe I can." She spoke gently as she watched him. Tyson was caught off surprise when she leaned in and hugged him. It had been a long time since he felt connected to anyone. Christy's touch was warm and pleasant, and it wasn't until then that he realized how much he missed it. Tyson quickly recognized what was going on and attempted to move away from the young woman. "No!" Christy shouted. She got to her knees and tugged his pants down. She spotted him and smiled. "Oh, absolutely. That is better." She spoke, then took him into her lips. "Wow!" Tyson shouted out. He had never experienced this before because his wife Imani refused to do it for him. Christy was really eager and stroked whatever she couldn't put into her lips. This created a major issue for Tyson. It had been over 5 years since he had been with anyone. He knew he wasn't going to last long. Not at all. Christy, it is too good. I am going to finish," he gasped. She smiled and raised her blue eyes to his. That added emotion pushed Tyson over the edge. "Oh my God!" He roared and released into Christy's lips. She swallowed rapidly and washed him once he was finished. He backed away because he was very sensitive. Christy stood up, her gaze sharp. "Can you give? Is this as nice as it gets?" He blinked at her, but he understood what she meant. Did he want to do this with her? Now that she had provided him with the best oral experience he had ever had, he felt compelled to reciprocate. Looking at her lovely physique, he realized how much he wanted to. "I am not thinking much more." He grabbed her hand and led her through the living area and into the bedroom. He paused next to the bed and drew her in for a kiss. She whimpered as his hands traveled down her back and across the cloth, covering her behind. He pinched her bottom with his large hands, making her moan loudly. He stopped kissing her and fell to his knees. He carefully drew her jeans down her lengthy legs. He was shocked to discover merely a small patch of blonde hair above her privates. He looked up and noticed her biting her lip while watching him. "You are so gorgeous," Tyson sighed. Her nervousness vanished as she drew his face towards her, desperate to feel his lips on her. He smiled and gave her a gentle nudge. Her legs touched the bed and she fell back into the mattress. He removed her shoes and slacks fully, and she lifted herself slightly, pouting at him when his lips touched the insides of her knees. Her pout turned into a gasp, which became louder as he kissed and licked his way up her inner thighs. "Tyson? Oh my God. Tyson, I need your mouth on me," she begged as he approached. He kissed her mound. Her hips rose from the mattress and she moaned with mead. He knew what his wife wanted, and while Christy appeared to be more sensitive, he needed to be kinder for the moment. When he sucked on her lower lips, she sobbed and grabbed his hair with both hands. He probed her opening with a finger as his tongue moved. He listened to her sounds and learned what she enjoyed. When he inserted a moist finger into her and softly licked on her sensitive place, she cried out again. Her body rises off the mattress. He ran his finger along her insides till he discovered the region that made her shake. She tried to pull his head closer as her cries grew louder. "Oh yes, that's it right there." Tyson went for it. He added a second finger and intensified his licking and sucking. Christy couldn't utter a sound as the ecstasy overpowered her. He could feel her body shivering from the overwhelming emotions. He moved his free hand up her tummy, grasped one of her breasts, and gently tugged on her tight nipple. "Oh my God," she shouted as she came to her senses. Her hand landed on her breast, squeezing it hard as she continued to feel the pleasure. Finally, she pushed on his head and he moved back, pulling his fingers out. He licked them clean while she stared, panting and shivering. She laid back on the bed and closed her eyes, coming down from her high. He stood up and observed her resting. A small voice within his skull asked him what he was doing. He had a startling flash of insight and nearly stumbled as he realized he was no longer thinking with his impulses, and his reasonable mind was disturbed. She was significantly younger. He had never been a flirt before. Nonetheless, he was content. He had just met a stunning young woman. What prompted him to change his behavior? She was attractive and intelligent, but they came from different worlds. They shared nothing in common. Even their values differed. He had been alone for slightly more than 5 years and was a widower. He still wore the wedding band. He didn't have to be true to his late wife, but he felt a sense of shame, as if he had broken some unwritten code. What is wrong? He gazed at the woman again, leaning back on her elbows. His thinking warned him to stop, even though his desires were impossible to resist. "I'm not sure why I did that," he said, his heart heavy in his chest. "You are overthinking it," she replied, observing his perplexed expression. "I think you are lovely and intelligent. Do you believe I am?" Yes, I do, he confessed clumsily. She smiled. That is all it needs to be, just a good time, no strings attached. I would like to see what you can do with that. She gestured toward his body, still feeling unsure. He nodded and entered the bathroom. He switched on the shower and allowed the water to flow. He flinched as he felt her hands on his back. Turning around, he noticed her beaming at him. He attempted to explain why this was a horrible idea, but she kissed him. Her kiss was so alluring that he found himself kissing her back and moving his hands to her chest. She responded with astonishment and delight. He drew away from her lips and sucked her breast into his mouth. She yelled out and drew him closer. Tyson needed her now. He switched off the water and lifted her up. She threw her arms around him as he carried her out of the restroom. He positioned her on the counter and drew her close. She stretched between them and guided him towards her. He pushed forward, feeling himself slide inward. He hesitated with wide eyes. Condom. I'm on a medication. Keep going, she insisted. It felt better than anything he could recall. She was warm, moist, and tight. He couldn't resist any longer. Christy was quite excited. His body was strong and his desire was intense. She sighed with pleasure as he went deeper. She noticed their reflection in the mirror. It was very amazing to watch them together. She noticed him moving inside her. She gasped as he lifted her legs, changing the angle to make it even better. His body moved quicker, and she felt as if she were floating. Watching herself in the mirror added to the weird experience. But she could sense everything, every forceful push at every moment of pleasure. He was giving her the most enjoyable time she'd ever had. Then he became intense. His muscles popped out as he doubled his speed. The impact against her made her cry out, yet she wanted more. Her climax struck her like lightning, sending waves of ecstasy through her body. He kept going, and the sensations intensified. She could hardly think, only feel happiness. Tyson. Oh, very wonderful, she murmured. Then he shoved in deep one more time and shouted. Christy felt his warmth within her. It was primeval, and time seems to stop. She felt a combination of ecstasy, surrender, and safety. It didn't make sense, but it felt very significant. She clutched to him, bringing his face down for a soft kiss. Kisses felt like promises, so she rested his forehead on hers instead. Tyson felt the ecstasy fade as he panted above her. His muscles felt energetic and alive, as if he had just finished a difficult workout. He hadn't felt so fantastic in a long time. He drew back softly, and Christy released go of his head. He lowered her arms to her chest, his gaze staying there. He was still shoving her against the counter, so he gradually moved back. She wept and panted as he stood. He noticed her swollen lips and hoped he had not damaged her. She appeared dazed, so he carefully scooped her up. She sighed and rested her head against his shoulder. Tyson carried her into the bedroom. His mind screamed something familiar. He later sat on the bed. She reached up and pulled him down for a kiss. It was hot and passionate, yet sensitive. As he pulled back, his muscles trembled. Her blue eyes were filled with curiosity as she felt his shakiness. Ashley looked fresh and gorgeous, like if she were in university. Why hadn't he noticed it before? Are you okay? She asked quietly. He couldn't speak, so he simply nodded. He needed air. Tyson stood by the lake, the fresh breeze raising goosebumps on his bare skin. He was unsure how he got there. She definitely is unique. That voice again. He looked up to the sky. It was growing dark, and she arrived early. He glanced to his right and noticed Imani. She stood right next to him, almost touching. He wanted to, but he knew better. The wind pulled her hair back, and she gazed at him with a forlorn expression. The water does not want you. Her comments felt like a smack, so he took a step back. But the lady within does. He shook his head in confusion and looked at the glass patio doors. Christy was inside, wrapped in his bed's comforter. What do you mean? He looked back at Imani, but she was gone. Attempting to speak with her shook him more than he wanted to admit. He shivered and moved away from the dark water. His legs took him across the yard to the back porch, where he opened the door to enter. Christy gazed at him with concerned blue eyes. He felt compelled to inform her. Imani responded, The lake does not want me. Christy used her gentle hands to touch his chest. She felt the frost on his skin and opened the comforter, pulling him inside to warm him with her body. They stood face to face. Who said that? Christy asked. He glanced into her eyes and saw only kindness. He didn't want to respond, but something told him it was fine. Christy gave him a close look and smiled slightly. She's intelligent. Tell me about her, she inquired, taking him to the couch near the small wood stove. He added another wood to the heater and joined Christy under the quilt. He felt lighter and more at peace. He was ready to speak, and Christy listened. Tyson Kane felt like a new man. Perhaps not new, but his new knee felt better. And it didn't ache all the time because his knee surgery had relieved the agony. He felt more like himself. It also helped that he had Christy, a stunning young woman who spent a lot of time with him. Christy Taylor had a full schedule of classes and a new part-time job. But anytime she had free time, she would go to his lakeside cottage. She had become his student, friend, and confidant since surprising him in his lawn last year. Christy had a strong determination, despite her young age. She made it easier for him to discuss things he kept private, such as the fact that he occasionally saw his deceased wife at night. He had seen Imani less since opening up about it, but the visits had not stopped entirely. Christy informed him she thought he might have unfinished business with his wife. Their quarrel had been cut short, so he understood. If she had said anything unusual, like as a seance, he would have sent her away. Tyson chuckled to himself as if he was actually going to get rid of a lovely woman who had improved his life. He wasn't young anymore, and he didn't get many opportunities like this. He returned from his walk and proceeded straight to his backyard, halting on the lake's edge. He truly appreciated Christy's company. He had become a recluse after his wife's injury, despite the fact that he was 59 years old and she was 22. They found comfort in discussing current events, even if their perspectives differed. He was beginning to listen to her, not just what he assumed she was saying. She did the same for him. They exchanged stories about their daily lives, or rather, she shared hers while he kept his basically the same. Christy had assisted him in improving his living conditions during the previous year by making little adjustments. He observed that she had placed images of them together in some of the picture frames throughout his house. The initial images of him and Imani remained mainly intact, but Christy added several with her beaming face and more apparent spots. She also persuaded him to agree to knee surgery. She took him to the hospital, and a few days later, they released him. Christy collaborated with his neighbor Barbara to check on him frequently during the initial weeks after surgery. Later, he discovered images of Barbara in several of the frames. He didn't know who made the adjustments. His rehabilitation from surgery took a long time, but he persevered through the pain until he could walk 6 miles without trouble. He approached his doctor about jogging again. The doctor joked about hitting his knee with a hammer, so jogging wasn't an option for now. Walking swiftly would have to suffice. This morning, the waves appeared tranquil. He had already gone in the lake before. He continued to swim out and back once a day. But he didn't wait till he was exhausted to go back. Imani had informed him that the lake didn't want him. Her statements terrified and embarrassed him, so he stopped pushing himself to the utmost in the chilly water. These days, he returned to the coast as soon as he felt exhausted. He no longer sacrificed his life to the lake. He sighed and turned his back on the stunning blue lake, going inside for a shower and breakfast. Following that, he did something different. Christy had introduced him to an online community where he could talk with his math pals. It took a few weeks to get through all of the unexpected messages about his survival and condolences for the loss of his wife. They eventually returned to the topic of math. He now had a few regulars to talk to. It wasn't everyone's idea of a lively discussion, but he appreciated it. He even had some good ideas. He was thinking about it. He smiled as he walked inside. His morning routine resumed. Christy Taylor was experiencing another moment of enlightenment. She was sitting in her Mercedes-Benz C-Class coupe in the coffee shop parking lot, allowing her thoughts to flow freely. She had learnt to give her mind time to absorb new information and perspectives. Tyson taught us another lesson. This morning she was thankful for many things, but not for objects. Tyson always said to avoid attaching emotions to things. It made the emotions less important. He never pressed his own beliefs on her. That was exactly how he preferred to live, and his rules made sense to her as well. She was not looking forward to telling Tyson she had to leave town and wouldn't be able to see him again. She had an opportunity waiting for her in New York City, where she could complete her schooling and begin her career at a large fashion company. It was a positive step forward. She knew Tyson would be thrilled for her and extremely supportive. He'd try to hide how upset he was to see her leave, but she was still concerned about him. He wasn't prepared to be alone yet. He still had mental blockages. He couldn't travel in a car and couldn't even sit in her driveway for more than a few minutes. She exhaled. She hoped to find him a new companion. She may then leave with peace of mind. She knew he could manage Barbara in small doses but thought she was too controlling, and he was correct. Barbara's compassionate personality was too powerful. Perhaps this is why her own children did not pay her many visits. Christy searched through her list of friends, hoping to find someone who could spend time with Tyson and help him conquer his concerns. However, most of her friends had long-term boyfriends who would not be comfortable spending time with someone as attractive as Tyson. She trembled in her seat, remembering their last date night. She would have trouble finding a new boyfriend as exciting as Tyson. She refocused her thoughts on her friends. There was Rachel, who had recently broken up with Chris after reconnecting with him for the fantastic makeup portion. Rachel was trouble, and Tyson didn't need it. Chris didn't either, but if he ever took her back, they deserved each other. Jillian. She wasn't seeing anyone at the time, but Christy remembered Jillian had serious daddy issues. Dating someone like Tyson may complicate everything. Jillian would appreciate that, but Tyson would not be pleased if she began calling him daddy. So Jillian was out. Miranda was seeing Vince, but this was new. Christy had horrible feelings about him. He was acquainted with Blake, and Tyson opened her eyes, revealing her ex-fiancé as the pampered guy he truly was. Vince was probably not much better. However, Miranda could be an excellent match for Tyson. Tyson may benefit from her enthusiastic personality and positive energy. Miranda was too much for Christy's other friends who thought she was reckless. Miranda simply struggled with social situations. Nothing. Tyson's patient nature could not cope. He may even enhance her confidence. Miranda was a second-generation American with Mexican roots. She was a few inches shorter than Christy and had wonderful caramel skin, warm brown eyes, full lips, and long brown hair. Miranda frequently grumbled about how obese she was in comparison to her white pals. She possessed powerful muscles from her love of road cycling to balance her larger lower body. Her breasts were small. She often joked that Christy must have received her share from the booby fairy. Christy's other pals were uncomfortable with her clinginess and this type of conversation, but Christy thought it was humorous. Miranda might be exactly what Tyson needs. Christy started her car and headed towards her neighborhood, but she selected a side street about a block away from her house. Miranda Moreno lived with her parents in a magnificent 5-bedroom home a block from Christy's parents' estate. Miranda was the eldest kid with an 18-year-old brother, Raul Jr., and a 16-year-old sister, Natalie. Christy felt a twinge of jealousy when she saw that her buddy had siblings. She never told her parents about this, however. Miranda's father, Raul Sr., was a well-known stock market investor, and her mother, Marie, was doing exceptionally well in business. Christy learned that Miranda's brother, Raul, had just received a new truck for his 18th birthday. He was thrilled to see whether Christy wanted to go on a trip with him one night. Miranda laughed so hard as she told Christy this. Raul apparently thought he was a ladies' man. Christy stopped her car and approached the front door to ring the doorbell. Raul Jr. soon arrived at the door with a huge smile. "Good morning, Christy. You look terrific today," he said, attempting to seem smooth. She grinned back and lifted her brow. "Good morning, Raul. Save the charm for your girls." "Christy, ignore him and head back to the kitchen," Miranda called from the inside. Raul simply stood there, entranced in Christy's blue eyes. She guessed. He wondered if she felt he was cool enough to have multiple girlfriends. Christy strolled past him, admiring his physique. He must spend a lot of time in the gym. Perhaps this is where he got his attitude. As she stepped into the kitchen, she could feel Raul's eyes on her. "Junior, please stop gazing at my pals, but don't be so foolish," Miranda snapped, and Christy's eyes widened with concern for her buddy. "I am not, and stop calling me Junior," he snapped back. Then he returned his gaze to Christy, attempting to remain composed. "Girls enjoy it when a guy shows that he appreciates their bodies." Christy shakes her head. "I'll introduce you to a friend of mine who knows how to treat a woman, okay?" she said. Raul's smile returned. "Is this the secret boyfriend? You never mentioned the perfect guy." Miranda asked. Her voice was a touch sharp. Concerned about Miranda? Christy gazed at Raoul. Could we speak alone? She asked softly, noticing how unhappy his sister was. He nodded and departed. Miranda grasped Christy's hand. Never mind. We will go to my room. Christy followed her into her bedroom. Miranda began to cry as soon as the door closed. Miranda hugged Christy while crying. What happened? Christy inquired when the crying subsided. Miranda. Sadness gave way to rage. Vince is a racist jerk. Christy was not surprised, but she tried to hide her emotions. What did he do? He texted me the day after we had been together to end our relationship. Then he shared a photo of us with a nasty caption. What? Christy let out an angry gasp. The post was taken down, but everyone saw it. It was very humiliating. Miranda began crying again. Christy fumed silently. If she could get a copy of that post, she knew who to send it to get Vince expelled from university. She would make sure of it. When Miranda stopped crying, she appeared determined. That is it. No more dating until I graduate. There are no nice men here. Christy smiled. Does this imply you might check in on a friend of mine? Sometimes. Miranda wiped her eyes, confusing a friend. Tyson. Kane. Miranda considered for a moment. I recognize that name. Christy sighed. The train terrorist runner. Oh, right. He stopped the train. His wife died and he was hurt. Have you been helping him? Miranda asked. Christy reddened, recalling something intimate. Not precisely. He was physically okay when I went to him for math help, but he had lost his wife and was deeply distraught. I've been trying to convince him to come to town, but he can't drive. Miranda seems astonished by her friend's appearance. Then she offered a huge smile. What? Christy inquired hesitantly. You keep surprising me, Christy. Don't make myself sound like a saint. I needed his aid in arithmetic, and he was excellent at it. I wanted to help him again. He's a lovely man, Christy stated. Miranda simply smiled with a knowing gaze. I'm leaving soon. I'd feel better knowing someone was watching over him, Christy pleaded. Miranda advised getting him outside and walking about. Christy nodded. He swims in the lake early and goes for a 6-mile walk thereafter. He also has a home gym. Miranda seemed impressed, so he understands how crucial physical treatment is. Christy smiled. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I can do that. Where is he? Miranda asked. Christy hugged her and applauded. Give me your phone number and I will add his information, Christy stated. Miranda passed it to Christy, who checked up the information on her own phone. He lives near the lake. You're a lucky guy. How did he get the house? Miranda inquired with a grin. Christy sighed. The homes there are passed down via families. He received it from his parents after they died. She finished transferring Tyson's information to Miranda's phone. Miranda felt sorry for her. Rude question. Christy's phone beeped with a message. It's my mother. I was going to meet her in Milan at a nightclub. I need to leave now. She instantly texted back that she was on her way. Then she took Miranda's arms and stared at her. I am sorry about Vince. He's a jerk, and he'll pay for his actions. Also, thank you for checking on Tyson. You will not regret it. He's great. She got up and dashed downstairs, attempting to get across town in 5 minutes. That was easy, when you drive a fast vehicle. Miranda saw her friend leave swiftly. She wondered what fascinating things were happening in her life right now. She wasn't jealous of Christy, maybe just a little. She looked up Tyson's address on her phone and planned to ride her bike on the new trail to see him the next day. Miranda remembered a story about 2 students who burned down the town and died at a train crossing after hitting Tyson Kane's car, killing his wife. Curious, she took out her tablet and looked up the story. She followed some links and quickly discovered information about Tyson. Wow, he is a large dude. She mentioned this after seeing a photograph of the tall professor at a campus event. His arm was around a slender woman, making him appear even larger. The woman was quite attractive and had skin tones close to her own. Tyson appeared to be quite thrilled. We're losing her. It must have been tough for him. If Christy thought he was a good person, Miranda was excited to meet him. She smiled cheerfully. He looked like a giant teddy bear. She could use a hug after all the trouble Vince has given her. Tyson swam through the little waves, and the lake water felt warmer than usual. He was getting stronger and could swim a little further each time before turning around. He was careful not to push too hard given his low body fat. He needed to keep going or he would drown. He looked up and saw a clear blue sky. It was going to be a beautiful day. He considered sunbathing. As he turned back, he noticed Barbara's house and its rooftop terrace. She has been watching over and safeguarding him for years. He noticed her binoculars catching the sunshine. Barbara had seen him struggle to return to shore several times before. Christy made him understand he had something worth living for. The money was gone. Leaving aside the hallucinations, she was no longer present. Christy told him Barbara had become a silent supporter. She had heard Barbara's modest words of encouragement the morning she first saw him stumble out of the water, allowing his neighbor to view into his backyard from her roof using binoculars. He reflected on that as he continued to swim. He moaned inwardly. Tyson was not going to adjust his behavior for his neighbor. He swam and sunbathed naked. That was not changing. He would simply ignore the prospect of peering into Barbara's. He could feel the water warming and knew he was coming closer to the beach. The swim was over. Tyson was not fatigued at all. He stood in thigh-deep water, breathing deeply to nourish his starving muscles. He would swim further tomorrow. He stared at his house. He adored his tiny refuge. The morning sun felt lovely, so he turned his face toward it, closed his eyes, and ran his hands over his head to squeeze the water from his hair. It was becoming long. His thick black curls resemble Armani's. He stepped out of the water and onto his grass, stretching his arms above his head and bending to the side. A piercing screech caused him to open his eyes. He noticed a beautiful young woman staring at him, her hands covering her mouth. She wore brightly colored, form-fitting garments. She swung around and disappeared up the path beside his house. He would have to either install a lock on the gate or put up a larger private sign. Miranda raced her bicycle down the winding route. Her thoughts raced. What had she just seen? Finally, she paused at a rest area with benches and drank. Christy had not named any family members who lived with Tyson. Perhaps a cousin? She was certain he was the sole child. So, the naked man she saw was not her younger brother. She'd seen a family resemblance before, her gaze fixed on his nudity. The shriek also astonished her. She patted her cheeks to calm her mind. It would take some time to forget the sight. She climbs back onto her bicycle. She began moving again. She'd need to speak with Christy about her desire. There appeared to be a problem, although an unexpected one. Good morning. Tyson. Christy called him after she ate breakfast. Hello, Christy. How are you doing today? He answered. She grinned as she heard the joy in his voice, but then she remembered why she phoned, and her smile dimmed slightly. Can I come to meet you this afternoon? Of course, I will make time for you, he joked. Staying for dinner? He sounded casual, but she detected a hint of optimism. Not today, she said. That is okay. Do you recall your first visit to my place? He asked. This astonished her, but she grinned again. How could I forget? He laughed. So another girl came up in my backyard this morning. She screamed and fled away. Christy felt he sounded worried. How did she look like? She hid her face, but she had brown eyes, long brown hair in a braid, and wore tight clothes with unusual shoes. Oh, yes. That was my friend Miranda Moreno. She rides her bike on country roads for leisure. I told her we were friends and paid you a visit at the lake. I didn't realize she came by today. Did you tell her about us? Tyson inquired, seeming curious. Just that we are pals. She smiled and remarked, I didn't share too much. Then I botched up our meeting. He exhaled. Christy laughed. I would not say that. You did not yell. Her laughter became louder. True, but I was better prepared to fight. I remember begging you to prove who you were. He joined in and laughed. Right, you are a tough cookie. I will talk to her. It will be all right. She was simply astonished. Christy reassured him. Should I get a lock for the gate or a larger private sign? He joked. Is this what the sign says? I assumed it said this method to see privates, she said and laughed. He chuckled. Okay, Miss Smarty Pants. See you this afternoon. Bye-bye. Christy hastily hung up and climbed into her car. She needed to talk to Miranda. She could have walked, but Christy knew a few places Miranda could be if she wasn't home when she rang the doorbell. Raoul Jr. responded with a large smile. 2 days in a row. You're either here all the time or never, he teased. She smiled back, amused by his remark. Looking for Miranda, she said sweetly. He sighed heavily. I hope you will visit me someday. She raised her eyebrow. Not today. Raoul stepped back and motioned her upstairs. She's returned from her ride. She's inside her room. Christy smiled, sensing his gaze on her as she climbed the steps. "Staring at me will not aid your dreams," she called over her shoulder. As she approached Miranda's door, she heard his disappointed sigh and knocked. "Miranda? It's me, Christy." There was a little shriek and some noises of items dropping. Miranda called from behind the door. Christy waited, trying not to think about the unusual humming she'd heard. Miranda stepped inside the open door. Her cheeks reddened. "Let's sit on the patio. It is a lovely day," she replied quickly. Christy could still hear a buzzing sound. "Are you certain you don't have to turn that off first?" she inquired gently. Miranda seemed humiliated. "Okay. Can you assist me move the bed?" They walked in and shifted the bed to get the personal massager, which had fallen between the mattress and the wall. Miranda turned it off and placed it in her bedside drawer. After pushing the bed back, they sat down facing one another. Miranda seemed humiliated. "I heard you had an eventful visit to Tyson's this morning," Christy began. Miranda's eyes widened. "You didn't tell me Tyson has family living with him that don't wear clothes." "Did you see him naked?" Christy remarked, grinning. She enjoyed it. "Did you see him?" "He emerged from the lake like a deity." Miranda said, "He is amazing." "Who is he?" "Tyson's younger cousin." Christy giggled and Miranda smiled at the cheerful sound. "Miranda." That was Tyson. Miranda seemed perplexed. "No, Mr. Kane is approaching 60. This individual appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. Tyson lives alone. You were looking at the right person. He swims daily." She held Miranda's hand. "He went through a lot following the accident. He dropped weight through intense exercise. He is still highly dedicated to his workouts." Miranda gradually realized, "He's your mysterious boyfriend." She gasped. Christy smiled gently. "Boyfriend is not the proper term. We are good friends, but there is no romantic passion. But you are close to him," Miranda guessed. "Christy." The smile grew. "Tyson is fantastic," Miranda shouted with delight as Christy confirmed her guess. Christy raised her hands to soothe her, but she didn't inform anyone else. Tyson was not looking for any of this. When we initially met, he was virtually always in his home. He did not want me in his backyard. He did not want to tutor me. He did not want me to join him on his afternoon walk. We would not have gotten together if I hadn't decided I wanted him and pursued him so hard. He was really concerned about our age difference. It did not disturb me as much because he is so handsome. Miranda considered Christy's plea for her to check on Tyson. "Were you expecting me to establish a relationship with Tyson too?" Christy appeared shocked. "No. Oh my goodness, no. I simply wanted someone to stop Tyson from closing himself away again. He needs to talk to someone face to face. If you get to know him and decide you want to start a relationship, you'll have to work things out with him. He is fantastic. But if I hadn't pushed, we wouldn't have existed. He is a gentleman." She grinned pleasantly. Miranda nodded, thinking about what she had learned. She understood it was too soon after the events to hunt for a new boyfriend. Honestly, she needed to take a break from dating. It could be good to have a guy to talk to. She had a thought of something else that would be quite great. "You said he enjoys working out, right?" she asked. Christy nodded. Miranda jumped off the bed, dragging her friend with her. They rushed downstairs and out into the backyard. They approached the enormous two-story garage at the end of the driveway. Miranda escorted Christy upstairs to the loft once she entered. They noticed numerous ancient bicycles hanging from the rafters. She turned to face her blonde pal. Miranda remarked eagerly, "We can fix up one of these old bikes for him and he can join me on my bike rides." Christy thought it was a terrific concept, but was concerned about the motorcycles. They might not be powerful enough to face Tyson. He could probably break them if he pushed hard enough. However, getting him a new bike that was both robust and the proper size was a brilliant idea. It would provide him exercise, allow him to leave the neighborhood, and provide Miranda with an excuse to spend time with him. "Miranda, you're a genius, but we need a better bicycle. Can you take me to the bike shop?" "The finest option right now?" Christy inquired with eagerness in her voice. Miranda sensed the thrill and nodded swiftly. "I know just where to go. Equal symbol." Tyson smiled as he heard car tires crunching on the gravel in his driveway. Christy was present when he heard another pair of tires. He turned towards the front entrance, a second automobile. He checked the oven. Everything was fine, so he walked over to the door and opened it. Christy's stylish white automobile was parked furthest from the door. She was exiting, smiling broadly at him in the location nearest to the home. A blue pickup was coming to a stop. He noticed the attractive brunette who had astonished him this morning at the passenger window. She looked at him with wide eyes and a frightened smile. The truck's engine went silent, and the charming brunette stepped out. She wore a new tight attire, but with sneakers this time. On the other side of the truck, there was a tall, attractive young man with the same complexion as the brunette. He smiled as he watched Tyson. Tyson stood on his steps, dressed in barely visible apron shorts and sandals. "Do you meet all of your visitors wearing simply an apron?" Christy exclaimed. "Happy?" He lifted the apron to reveal his shorts to Christy, who squealed in astonishment, perhaps assuming he was bare underneath. "Except for you and George, I rarely receive guests. Besides, I was baking cookies," he explained. Christy was now standing next to the other woman. "Tyson, Miranda Moreno is my good friend. This is her brother, Raul Jr." Tyson noticed that Raul liked being labeled gorgeous but disliked being called young or junior. "Hello, Miranda. Raul?" Miranda gave him a dazzling smile, and the young man smiled back, but Raul remained amused. Perhaps he disliked seeing a man wearing an apron. "Miranda genuinely apologized for going into your backyard without permission this morning." Tyson waved his hand. "Would you like some freshly baked shortbread cookies?" "Oh, the lovely man has invited us in with goodies." "What might go wrong?" Christy teased Miranda before taking a step forward and grasping her arm. Tyson took a step back and held open the door for his guests. Raul stopped inside, angry, as Christy led Miranda around. He turned back to Tyson, who raised an eyebrow. "How can she describe you as attractive while you are dressed for women's work?" The young man expressed his annoyance. "Women's work? Who taught you such garbage and claimed it was valuable?" Tyson replied with a grin. He went into the kitchen, took up a warm cookie from the oven, and brought it to Raul. The man took a bite and nodded as it dissolved in his lips with a light crunch. Tyson grinned and offered the ladies a plate of cookies, which they each took. "Oh, this is so good," Christy exclaimed as she approached. "Thank you for the treats." She embraced and kissed him. Tyson felt self-conscious, but he kissed her back until she moved away. Raul stared at her, stunned. "What? He is a true gentleman. He cooks well, keeps his house clean, and is quite attractive," Christy stated. "These are women's jobs." Raul became enraged. "Why do you believe that some jobs should be reserved for men or women? I thought my thoughts were old-fashioned, but yours made me feel young," Tyson shot back. Raul stared at him. "How old are you, 59? What?" Raul turned to face Christy. "Are you dating an elderly man?" Tyson gazed at Miranda. "What is that? Grandfather?" she said quietly. Tyson wanted to be upset, but he sort of agreed with Raul. He didn't understand why Christy liked him so much. He shrugged. "I might be old enough to be one, but I do not have any children or grandchildren." He lamented the fact that his opportunity had passed. Raul was not done. He returned his gaze to Christy, who smiled slightly. "I don't understand it. As you mentioned, I am both strong and beautiful. What does this guy have that I don't?" Tyson smiled as he continued. "I can bake cookies. I can teach you to bake chocolate chip cookies. Women adore them, and the fact that you created them will get you major points. My gym buddies would laugh at me." Raul objected. Christy exchanged a mournful look with Miranda. "I believe we discovered the source of Raul's antiquated views of manhood. Outdated." "Being a man isn't obsolete," he snapped. "No, but given your attitude toward women, it is. You're intelligent. You can do better." Christy spoke bluntly. Raul turned back to Tyson. "Okay, you will show me how to make cookies if you defeat me in arm wrestling." Tyson gazed at the young man. He was strong and eager to prove himself to Christy. Tyson exhaled and gazed at Raul's powerful arms. This was going to be painful, but he was used to it. "Okay, fine," Tyson said, removing his apron. Raul looked at Tyson's body and felt concerned. "You can remove your shirt if that helps," Tyson recommended. Raul soon became topless as well. He had smooth and long muscles. Christy nodded at him, and Raul smiled boldly. Tyson stepped to the kitchen counter, bracing his elbow there. Raul and him held hands and clutched the countertop. Christy placed her hand on top of theirs. "When I raise my hand, you start. Ready?" They nodded. "Go." Tyson felt the strain almost immediately. Raoul was extremely strong but overconfident. Tyson smiled as he looked into his eyes and pressed harder. Tyson's suffering intensified, but he refused to give up. Raoul's confident expression began to shift to astonishment, then terror. Tyson's smile widened. Arm wrestling is about both strength and agony. How much pain can you tolerate? Raoul? Raoul winced as Tyson tightened his grip. Are you ready to get serious? Tyson asked. Raoul tried to mask his amazement as Tyson began to push his arm back at a 45-degree angle. Raoul yelped and stepped back, releasing Tyson's grasp. He shook his hand to rekindle his feelings for an elderly man. You're quite powerful, he exclaimed. Raoul! Miranda chastised Tyson, but he chuckled. Christy smirked. What number of arm wrestling matches have you won? Tyson smiled shyly and touched his arm. That was my first and perhaps the last. The kid is powerful. Raoul seemed shocked and proud. Do not tell him that. It will get to his head. Miranda sighed. Tyson shook his head, grinning at Raoul. Let's prepare some cookies. Put your shirt back on. He put his apron back on. Raoul frowned. It's difficult to take you seriously wearing that apron. It looked nicer on my wife. Try cooking bacon shirtless, and you'll understand. He looked at Raoul. Never try it without the clothing that made everyone laugh. Do you understand what it takes for a man to wear this proudly? Raoul seemed unsure. Confidence. Women like that. It's not about being arrogant. Confidence entails being content with who you are. What matters is what is on the inside. Raoul smiled and nodded. Let's make cookies. Christy and Miranda watched Tyson teach Raoul how to make chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Raoul completed all of the job per Tyson's instructions. When the cookies were done, the ladies applauded Raoul's first successful try. Raoul smiled at Tyson. What did you used to do? Tyson sighed. I was a mathematics teacher. No way, you are a math nerd. Raoul chuckled. Christy approached and leaned on Tyson. I am a math genius, she said. Tyson laughed and gave her a gentle kiss. You say the kindest things. Tyson looked at Raoul, who still appeared to be uncomfortable with Christy's display of devotion. If you're so smart, why don't you teach? Raoul spoke in a harsh tone. Tyson's smile vanished. People keep asking me that and I keep telling them I am retired. He has PTSD, you moron, Miranda snapped. Raoul glanced at him with amazement. Tyson gave Miranda a stern glance before turning to Christy. Have you been talking about me with others? He asked sternly. Christy met his gaze and nodded. Miranda has a fantastic concept, and we're here to make it happen. Tyson was caught off guard by her audacious plan. Christy responded, Come outside, with a wide grin. Tyson believed he had no choice but to follow her enthusiasm. Miranda was also grinning widely. Raoul followed, frowning in the driveway. Raoul removed the tarp, which was covering the back of his pickup. Tyson spotted a road bike. It had a gleaming silver frame with bright stripes, black wheels, and rims. Raoul lifted it out, and Miranda took it from him. She and Christy walked it to Tyson. Raoul discovered another bike in the pickup. Tyson's attention shifted back to the two women, who showed him the silver bike. Christy bought you a bike? Miranda let out a cheer. Tyson's mouth dropped open in surprise as he looked at the stunning blonde. She bit her lip, so he closed his mouth and returned his gaze to the sleek bike. It's beautiful. Even when it is stationary, it appears to move quickly, he said. Do you know how to ride a bicycle? Raoul inquired, causing the two women's faces to fall as they became concerned he might not. Tyson couldn't help but laugh at their faces. He smiled at Raoul. Yes, I do, however. It's been a while and I don't see any gear shifters on this one. Miranda sighed with relief and quickly demonstrated that the brake levers also functioned as gear shifters. Tyson grabbed Christy's hand and looked her in the eye. Thank you. This is extremely generous of you. He looked at the sleek bike once more. It is not a car, but it does not have to be. It allows you to exercise and move faster than walking. Christy said it's easier to get into town now. I considered getting you a car, but Miranda suggested a bike because she enjoys cycling. I hope you don't mind that I spoke with her about this. Tyson suddenly understood why she had done all of this. She was leaving. They had discussed it as something for the future, but it appeared that the future had arrived already. He looked at the other two. Could you give us a moment? When Miranda nodded, he gently guided Christy to the side. When are you leaving? he asked softly. She took a deep breath. End of next week. He nodded, but his stomach clenched internally. Is this a huge opportunity? She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. Hey, there were no tears. We knew this day would come and there was no need to cry. We're great friends and always will be. I will always support you. He looked at Miranda, putting another piece of the puzzle together. Did you intend for your friend to look after me? He asked. Christy sniffed. It's as if you can take care of one another. My other friends might stop hanging out with her once I leave because they don't understand her. She needs someone who can boost her confidence. She also makes poor choices with boyfriends and has been hurt on several occasions. She cycles alone, which worries me. Could you go with her? Sometimes, and I hope you like the bike. He felt better knowing he wasn't simply a charity case. I adore the bicycle, thank you very much. I'll absolutely ride it. And if it allows me to go around more easily, even better. Good, because I have more presence, she exclaimed, rushing to her car. She retrieved a couple of bags from the trunk and returned to him. One of the bags had a black cycling helmet with vent holes and bright stripes on the sides. There were also some black fingerless cycling gloves with cushioning. Will this fit over all of my hair? He asked. Perhaps I should cut it back to the shorter length I had. No, Christy and Miranda exclaimed, before laughing. Christy recovered first. Your hair looks fantastic and compliments you well. Please keep it long, she asked, fluttering her eyelids at him. He sighed and pushed his hair back. He was able to fit the helmet on, despite the fact that his hair was bunched up in the back. Miranda moved forward and grabbed his hair into a bundle. You should tie it back before putting on the helmet. Oh, right. He realized she still had his hair. You may let go now, he replied, smiling. She stepped back and smiled, embarrassed. Christy then pulled out black biking shorts, socks, and a cycling jersey from her luggage. She handed him the jersey, which he held up by his shoulders. Tyson laughed in delight. The clothing was black, covered in arithmetic formulas that resembled chalk scribbles, a math geek cycling jersey. This is fantastic. Christy and Miranda smiled from ear to ear. Go try it on, Christy advised. Miranda stated that nothing goes under the riding shorts. Her face turned crimson. He handed Miranda his helmet and moved the garments into his room. He removed his shorts and put on the cycling shorts. They felt snug, almost like a second skin. The padding made him feel like he was wearing a diaper. He put on the jersey, which was snug but did not restrict his movements. He looked in the mirror at his long hair. It resembled Armani's. He went to Armani's dresser, opened a drawer, and pulled out a white hair scrunchie. He had his hair pinned back well enough at the front entrance. He put on the new socks first, then the sneakers. He didn't have the special shoes Miranda wore outside. Christy whistled. The pants fit too tightly. He said, No, they're perfect. Christy replied and joined him at the foot of the steps. She patted his chest. I have to leave, but I would like to come back this weekend. Saturday afternoon until Sunday afternoon. He smiled. Sure, that sounds good. He wanted to make their time memorable, maybe make a wonderful meal. Christy kissed him warmly, and he became lost in the moment. Tyson backed away after Raoul made a noise. Christy smiled and went to speak to Miranda. Christy was giggling as she drove away a few minutes later. Tyson spotted Miranda looking at him, her eyes big and lower than his face. He realized his delight over the kiss was definitely visible. He took a big breath to relax. I've got things to do. Are you staying here, sis? Raoul inquired, sounding agitated. Yes, I want to ensure Tyson's bike is properly set up. Perhaps we could go for a ride. She looked at Tyson, hopefully. He nodded, and she grinned. Tyson said, Nice to meet you, Raoul, waving. Raoul smiled back. You both take care. Miranda and Tyson watched Raoul leave before going to the two bikes. You don't have bicycle shoes yet, so they use simple pedals. You should acquire some riding shoes shortly. They enhance the riding experience. She instructed him to sit on the bike, leaning against the house. She adjusted and tightened the seat. When you obtain new shoes and pedals, we can adjust it again. For the time being, this works well. She smiled, and he nodded. Ready for a ride? She asked. Sure. Let me lock up first. Tyson went inside to get his wallet, keys, and phone. He found a pocket on the back of his jersey for his belongings. He locked up, put on the helmet, and then the gloves. He felt pretty good in his new outfit. They walked their bikes to the road. Tyson smiled shyly at Miranda. I used to bike a lot as a kid and even rode in Europe, but it has been years. This feels a little scary. She suggested that we start by getting used to the gears and brakes. He agreed and got onto the bike. Tyson quickly regained his balance. The new bike was smooth and simple to steer. Miranda gave tips on using the gears and brakes. He soon got the hang of it. They rode along the lakefront, speeding up until they were racing. It felt natural. Christy was correct. Cycling didn't make him anxious. He loved it. Soon they reached the new road into town. Miranda appeared hopeful. He nodded, and she happily led the way. He followed, trying not to stare at her in her cycling pants. He looked away and saw the new path, trail, or road. He asked, "Can we stay on the road?" She asked. He nodded. "Either is fine road, then?" They rode on the smooth road, talking. She spoke about group rides she had been on. She didn't race, but enjoyed riding with others. She tried joining a local group, but found them to be snobby. Miranda looked at him, hopefully again. "I'm hoping you'll love cycling enough to start a group with me." He laughed. "So far, so good. This is amazing." Her smile lit up her face. Tyson finally noticed something small attached to her helmet. His own helmet didn't have it. "What's on your helmet?" "Oh, it's a video camera. I sometimes record my rides," she said. "Is it recording now?" "No. I always inquire first." "I didn't know if you would mind," she said, looking a bit shy. "If you want to record, go ahead," he said. She grinned at him. "This segment is flat and straight. I'll wait to record when we get to the return trip. The country road is much more intriguing." Tyson thought about that road and remembered the last time he rode on it. He felt a bit apprehensive, but drew his focus back to the present journey. Cycling felt different from driving, and that helped him feel better. He started looking forward to how the bike would handle the hilly and twisting road. They entered the edge of the town, and Tyson felt a slight excitement. He wasn't highly drugged like the last time he was here for surgery. That had been a terrible period. He looked around but didn't recognize some of the stores. The area had been refurbished, and it felt more modern now, though not necessarily in a positive way. "Hello, an ice cream shop," he said excitedly. Miranda unclipped her pedals, slowed, and came to a stop. She walked her bike to the outdoor tables, and Tyson hurried to join her. Tyson smiled as he continued. "My treat." "What would you like? A single scoop of chocolate, please?" she replied, smiling as she sat at one of the tables. They had the patio entirely to themselves. Tyson parked his bike on a table and dashed inside to collect the ice cream. Miranda was thrilled. Tyson appeared to like the ride, which bodes well for her plans to create a cycling group. Even if it were only the two of them, she'd be content thinking about the two of them. She remembered what her friend Christy had said. The thought made her feel warm. She hadn't had a partner in a long time, and her previous relationship wasn't fantastic. Movement drew her attention. Blake Darlington was parking his BMW convertible. He looked to see if she was alone, and she seemed worried. She turned on her helmet camera, just in case. "Where is Christy?" he asked roughly. Miranda never liked Blake. He always gave her strange stares, as Vince did. "I'm not sure where she is," she said gently. "Christy, according to my friend at the bike shop, spent a lot of money on a silver Cannondale racing bike, which is now here," he said, getting out of his car and approaching her. "You've lied yet again. First Vince tails, now this." He reached out and touched the bike. "Don't. It is not yours to touch." "Just like you can't touch Christy," she explained. Blake became irritated and scowled at her. "When speaking with someone who is more experienced than you, keep your lips shut." "Perhaps I should close it for you," he suggested, going closer. "Hey, back off now!" Tyson's strong voice echoed out, and Miranda felt relieved. "Take care of your own business." Blake started but stopped as he noticed Tyson approaching. He stepped back from Miranda. Tyson's size and the two miniature ice cream cones he holds make him appear even more menacing. Knowing Tyson was over 60 and a math nerd made it even more amusing. Miranda couldn't help but smile as she accepted the chocolate ice cream from him. Blake gazed at Tyson in his new bicycle. He appeared bewildered. "Who are you?" Blake demanded. "Who are you?" Tyson responded, licking his vanilla ice cream. Miranda exclaimed excitedly, "That's Blake, Christy's ex-fiancé." "Oh," Tyson said he was beginning to understand. He took another lick at his ice cream. Blake looked between Tyson and Christy's expensive bike. "Who are you?" he asked again. "Tyson? Kane?" he responded. Miranda exclaimed excitedly, "Kristen's boyfriend!" Tyson looked at her and shook his head. He frowned at his melting ice cream, and Miranda watched Blake's disgusted expression as he looked Tyson up and down. "She left me for you?" "No, she left you for personal reasons," Tyson spoke calmly. Miranda snorted. Christy appears to be much happier now than she ever was with Blake. Tyson appeared frustrated. "You aren't helping," he said. Miranda's eyes widened in fear as Blake sprang at Tyson. Tyson's right hand shot out, shoving his ice cream cone into Blake's face. Blake staggered back, blinded by the ice cream as Tyson watched him. Blake swung wildly and slammed his hand into a light pole. The sound of his bones breaking made Miranda and Tyson wince. Blake stopped and cried out in pain. "That's broken," Tyson said. "I'll call an ambulance," Tyson said with a sigh, pulling out his phone. After the call, he asked Miranda to get some napkins from the shop. When she came back out, a police car arrived. She handed some napkins to Blake, who was nursing his broken hand at one of the tables. The rest went to Tyson, who used them to clean the ice cream off his hand. Miranda then turned off her helmet camera, took out the memory card, and copied the video to her phone. Two officers walked up to their group. Did someone call 911? Tyson started to speak, but Blake burst out, "I was attacked!" Miranda jumped up and Tyson quickly put a finger to her lips before turning to the police. He handed them his ID. "I called 911. Mr. Collington got upset over something Miss Moreno said about my relationship with his ex-fiancée, Christy Taylor. Then he got physical. Liar. This jerk hit me in the face with his ice cream. I had to defend myself." Blake argued, realizing too late how silly that sounded. The officer holding Tyson's ID smiled. "I didn't recognize you. You look so different from the guy we found in the ditch 6 years ago." Tyson, frozen, surprised, and looked at the officer. "I'm Officer Patrick. I found you in that ditch all beaten up. It looks like you've healed well," Patrick said, handing back the ID. Tyson nodded with a stiff smile. "Yes, it took some time, but thank you, Officer Patrick," Tyson replied, shaking his hand. Patrick's partner smiled to Miranda, saw the defeated look on Blake's face. She smiled, knowing she could make his day worse. "Would you like to see what really happened?" she asked the officers. Everyone turned to look at her. She pointed to the camera on her helmet. "I recorded everything." Blake turned pale. Miranda grinned at the officers. The video starts when Blake pulled up to the curb. She looked at Blake, whose eyes were red and squinty. "Yes, I recorded all your nasty comments, and I'll be going to the station tomorrow to press charges for your threats." She enjoyed seeing the panic on his face. What a wonderful day. Tyson saw the satisfied look on Miranda's face. She really didn't like Blake. "Will you be pressing charges, Mr. Kane?" Officer Patrick asked, pulling Tyson back to the moment. Tyson didn't have the energy for a long process. "No, I thought the ice cream in the face would cool him down. His punching the light post is enough justice for me. I hope he learned something from it," Tyson said with a sigh. He saw Miranda give a memory card from the camera to Officer Patrick's partner and then put a spare card into the camera for their ride back. After saying goodbye, Tyson watched the police lead Blake to the ambulance that had just arrived. He then went inside the ice cream shop to wash his hands. When he came back out, he looked at Miranda. "Are you ready to keep going?" She nodded happily. The ride through downtown showed Tyson many changes. The streetlights were new, the roads freshly paved and painted, many buildings looked renovated. The core of the town had come alive again. He wondered why the town had fixed up the area that would have been destroyed if 2 students had succeeded in their plan. Maybe the national attention forced the town council to act. The money likely would have gone elsewhere if not for that. So this was doubly good. He was happy to see new life in the town, with young people from the local university enjoying boutique shops and coffee houses as they got closer to the university. Tyson realized the ride from his home wasn't long or hard. He thought about visiting George in the future. He slowed down and Miranda looked at him with curiosity. "Do you think it's okay if I drop by and say hello to George?" he asked. She gave him a big smile. "That sounds like a great idea. Which building?" 6 years ago, the math department was in Clement Hall, he said, unsure. "It's still there." She rode across the campus and stopped at a bench outside the building. Miranda gestured for Tyson to place his bike on the grass next to hers. "I'll watch the bikes, take your time," she said, pulling out her phone. Tyson put his helmet on the bike and made his way up the steps to the big double doors of the building. At the top, he looked down at himself. Wearing cycling gear wasn't the best look for visiting his old workplace. He took a deep breath and sighed. He was retired and didn't need to impress anyone. He pulled the door open and walked inside. The admin offices were just to the right. George's office was behind them. Tyson wasn't staff anymore, so he'd asked the office staff to check if George was free. He opened the door and went to the counter, where two young women looked at him. "We don't accept courier deliveries in this office," one said. Tyson laughed. "I'm not a courier. I'm looking for George Haley. I'm an old friend. Is he in?" Tyson heard the office door open behind him, but focused on the young woman at the counter. She looked at him with suspicion. "I need a name," she said. Tyson came. There was a gasp to his right, and books fell to the floor with a loud thump. He turned around to see an older woman staring back at him. She was short, around 5 feet tall, wearing simple 1-inch heeled shoes. Dressed in a tan blouse, a brown sweater, and a brown skirt, she still looked slim with gray hair and bright green eyes. He remembered her name, Gail Sampson. She was George's secretary and had worked at the university for a long time. "Tyson," she said, her voice shaking. He smiled. "Hello, Gail." "Oh my God, Tyson!" she cried, running forward to hug him. He looked surprised, but hugged her back. He noticed 2 office girls staring at him. Gail stepped back, smiling. "You managed to leave your home and come to the university?" He saw the 2 women listening and smiled down at Gail. "Yes. Well, not me. A student, Miranda Moreno, suggested I might be able to ride a bike instead of using a car, and it worked. Here I am." He looked around. "I still can't believe I'm here. You have to see George," Gail said excitedly. He nodded. "Is he in his office? I'd like to say hello." "No, he's teaching a class. Come with me," she insisted. Tyson hesitated. "I don't want to disturb him or his class." Gail opened the office door, her green eyes serious. "George would never forgive me if I didn't bring you to see him right away." She led him up the stairs to the 3rd floor. When they reached the 3rd classroom on the right, Tyson tried to stop her, but she knocked on the door twice and pushed it open. George Haley stood at the front of the class with a frustrated look. His wild white hair was a mess like he'd been pulling it. He looked at the door and froze when he saw who was there. The math book slipped from his hands and hit the floor loudly. Gail gently pushed Tyson forward. He felt the eyes of 18 students turn his way. "You're here." "How?" George gasped. "A student, Miranda Moreno, suggested that if I couldn't travel in a car, I might be able to do it on a bicycle." He gestured to the room. "It looks like it worked," he said humbly. "Can't travel in a car? Lame," a student muttered. "Mr. Phillips, apologize now or get out of my classroom," George shouted, glaring at the young man. "George? It's okay. Being young and foolish isn't a crime," Tyson said, stepping closer to his friend. "Apologize," George growled quietly. "I'm sorry," Mr. Phillips said quickly. Tyson watched his friend calm down. "I'm sorry for disturbing your class. I just finally managed to come into town without any problems, so I thought I'd visit you since you visited me many times," Tyson explained. "It's wonderful, and I'm glad you shared this with me." George stepped forward and took Tyson's hands. "Mr. Haley, can you introduce us to your friend?" asked a woman with short black hair in the front row. George smiled at her and placed a hand on Tyson's back. "This is my good friend, Tyson Kane." Some students looked surprised, recognizing the name. The woman who spoke seemed to be one of them, the same Tyson Kane who stopped the tear. Yes, but more importantly, he's a math genius. Tyson smiled at his friend's excitement but shook his head. Seeing the students' confused faces, George looked at the clock. "Okay, we have 20 minutes left. Who's still confused by the current chapter?" All hands went up and George scowled, then turned to Tyson. "I've messed this up. Can you help them?" Tyson leaned back, unsure, then looked at the curious faces. He found himself moving to the front of the class. George handed him the textbook and he saw what they were studying. He asked the students about their difficulties, gathered enough information, then made everyone stand, stretch their hands out, and blow raspberries to clear their minds. After some laughter, most of the students followed his lead. Mr. Phillips and the boy next to him did not. Mr. Phillips and he asked, turning to the other student. "Mr. Kent," the young man mumbled. Tyson nodded. "Mr. Phillips and Mr. Kent, clear your minds with any silly gesture. How about this?" He struck a bodybuilder pose and made a silly grunt. The class laughed and Mr. Kent imitated him, earning applause from Tyson. Mr. Phillips gave a weak effort, and Tyson nodded. "Great. Now that we're all fresh and new, let me tell you a little story," Tyson said. 12 minutes later, the students were leaving the room, chatting happily. Tyson leaned against the desk, feeling warm inside. It had been a long time since he felt this way. Miss DeWitt stopped in front of him. "Thank you for coming today. We all feel much better now. If you wanted to come more often, we would love to have you. I would love to have you." She smiled at him as she left. George had a big, happy smile, and Gail leaned against the wall by the door with the same look. Tyson focused back on the moment. "Thank you for letting me help out today. That was fun." George shook his head. "Fun? You call that fun? Did you see how stressed I was when you arrived? This stuff isn't fun unless you love it. For you, it's a passion. For me, it's hard work. The students listen to your every word, not Mr. Phillips." George sighed. "No, not him. He came in with a bad attitude." Tyson nodded. "You can't help those who don't want it." He looked at George and Gail. "I missed you guys." Gail stepped closer. "We missed you too. The students missed you as well. They need you to come back." Tyson looked surprised. "Two was just helping George. This one time I'm retired. You did me a great favor and I really appreciate it," George said, patting his arm. "But you can't deny it. The thrill of teaching, the joy of connecting with the students. You're a natural teacher. Math is your passion. No other class of mine has been this excited. After a lesson, you should come back to teach. Everyone would benefit." George stopped as Tyson looked ready to argue. So he raised his hands. "We are just excited about the possibilities your new mobility brings. Think about it. You are always welcome to visit. And Miss DeWitt seemed keen on you too, George." "Haley," Gail scolded. "I'm just saying," George replied with a grin. Tyson hugged him, then hugged Gail, who smiled big. "I should get going." "I left Miranda waiting out front with the bikes. We must go thank her in person," George exclaimed, and Gail nodded. Tyson led his friends downstairs and out the front doors to meet Miranda, who stood up as they approached. Gail hugged her. Then George did too. "Thank you for helping Tyson get out and about," George said. "Oh, it was nothing special and I didn't do it completely selflessly. I hoped he would enjoy cycling and join me for rides," she admitted. Gail patted her hand. "It was still your idea?" "None of us thought of it," she said, giving George a look. He shrugged. George looked at Tyson's bike. "That's a beautiful bike. How much does something like this cost?" Tyson blinked and looked at Miranda. She looked nervous. "How much did Christy spend on the bike?" he asked. $6,000, she said quietly. "What?" Tyson gasped. Miranda bit her lip and looked at him nervously. Tyson frowned. "I'm going to talk to her." George put his hand on Tyson's arm. "The price is small compared to your freedom." Tyson looked at his friend, then nodded. "We should go. It was great seeing you two again. I'll visit more often." "Think about what we said," Gail added, and Tyson nodded again. They got back on their bikes and waved to George and Gail as they rode away from the campus. They followed a new path to the western edge of town, where the road turned into a country lane. It was blocked to cars, but they could ride between the posts. They picked up speed, and Tyson began to smile as the bike handled the hills and curves well. He had to admit it was a finely made bike. Still, he thought $6,000 was too much. He would insist on paying back part of it. There was such a thing as being too generous on a straight road. He looked over at Miranda, who was watching him. "Are you mad at us?" she asked. "No. Your hearts were in the right place. I'm sure I could have ridden a bike that cost less and enjoyed it almost as much." He exhaled. He really was enjoying the ride. "So will you keep going on rides with me?" Miranda asked. He smiled as he saw the road rise ahead. "Yes, I will. This is wonderful," Miranda squealed happily, then sped ahead. He stood up to follow. He felt like a kid again, and it felt good. Devon Wilson walked through the hospital's emergency ward, feeling down. Once the chief surgeon brought energy to a room when he arrived. The nurses used to look forward to his visits, but now they stayed away from him. He understood why they did. These days he got angry easily and lost his patience even quicker. 2 police officers were with a young man who looked like he'd never faced a hard day in his life. Devon couldn't fully relate, but he knew what it was like to grow up rich. His parents had a lot of money and he never lacked anything. He went to the best private schools and the most famous medical college. He belonged to top sports clubs and mixed with society's richest. Marrying Cecily had been more about politics than love, and it ended badly. When they divorced, he swore he wouldn't marry again. But for one woman, he would have happily made an exception. But it wasn't meant to be. With a sigh, he picked up the patient's chart and walked over to them. One look at the papers and how the young man held his right hand told him all he needed to know. The man had already gone for x-rays when he arrived. Devon would check the results on the computer after talking to the patient. The 3 men looked at him as he got closer. "Hello, Mr. Collington. I see you've hurt your right hand. How did it happen?" "I punched something hard," the young man said shortly. "Something or someone? If the police are here, usually someone else is involved." Devon noted. "I aimed at someone to defend myself, but I hit a light post." Blake mumbled. Devon looked at the officers. "Did the other person get hurt?" "No." Mr. Kane dodged the punch. Mr. Collington was lucky Tyson didn't hit back. That guy is tough. Devon blinked as his head began to ache. Did you say Tyson Kane?" The officer nodded. "I was told he was badly hurt, stuck at home with some mental issue." Devon mumbled in shock. The cop laughed. "I don't know about that, but he didn't look hurt to me. He was riding bikes with a pretty girl and looked happy about." "Hey!" Devon stormed away and dropped the patient file at the nurse's station as the pain in his head grew worse. Kane riding bikes with some girl? Impossible. He left the building, got into his porch, and sped out of the parking lot. He quickly passed through town and raced on the new road, heading south to the lake. The road was smooth and less busy, perfect for speeding. Turning onto the lakefront road, he nearly hit a young woman on a bicycle, probably the girl who was with Kane. He showed her his middle finger out the window and sped down the road. He knew where Tyson lived. He had been there once before. Devon drove into the gravel driveway and got out of his car. He walked up to the door, his thoughts all over the place. He wasn't sure what he would say or do, but he needed to see if the police were right. He pounded on the door, and it opened. There stood Tyson, not looking crippled at all. In fact, he looked healthier than Devon Wilson. "What the—" Devon hit him in the gut with all his strength, pushing him back into the living room. He hit him again and again. Using every move he knew to cause pain, he wanted Kane to suffer. When he came to his senses, he stood over Tyson, breathing hard. His hands hurt a lot. Kane was all muscle and bone, no fat. Devon had broken his fingers from the strikes. He had used skills from his martial arts training that he had never used on anyone until now. He scowled down at Tyson, wondering how he survived the accident that took Imani from him. "Why are you still alive?" Devon growled. Tyson blinked. "You beat me up? You didn't kill me?" "No! Why didn't the train kill you two?" Devon shouted, spitting out the words in anger. Tyson paused, wincing in pain. "I don't know. Sometimes I wish it had." Devon hit him again and pulled his hand back, hissing in pain. Tyson looked up at him. "Pretty stupid for a doctor to hurt his hands like this." Devon glared at him. "You're right, but I forgot. You're the genius here." Then he kicked Tyson hard in the side. Tyson groaned and something heavy hit Devon's back, tearing at his face. He spun and the female cyclist landed on the sofa with a thump. Devon touched his face and winced. His fingers came back bloody. "You scratched me! What did you do to my face?" He took a step toward her, but something grabbed his ankle with force. He screamed in pain as the grip tightened. "Miranda, go!" Tyson yelled. She jumped off the couch and ran out the open door. Devon kicked at Tyson again, but Tyson blocked it with his arms and let go of Devon's ankle. Devon turned to follow the girl. "She told me." Devon stopped, Tyson's quiet words ringing in his head. He turned to see Tyson watching him from the floor, face bloody eyes on him. "She told you? Told you what? Did she say?" "We had an affair," Devon asked quietly, feeling his anger build again. Tyson just watched him, eyes judging. "I loved her," Devon shouted. Devon screamed at Tyson. I would have been a better husband than you ever were back then. Tyson stammered to loved her. You should have shown it better. Then she wouldn't have come to me. Devon snapped back. The look in Tyson's eyes told Devon he hadn't known Devon had been bluffing, and now Tyson was hearing the truth for the first time. You really didn't know? Devon sighed, feeling a mix of disgust and satisfaction. He wanted Tyson to hurt just like he was hurting. The first time was in Indianapolis. After the convention, we went to a bar and got drunk. Imani followed me to my room. She wasn't very good, but I was drawn to her. We didn't go all the way, but I did more than I should have. He watched Tyson's face fill with pain and continued. Imani was distant at work for a while, but at the San Francisco convention, she came to my room again. This time she wasn't drunk. She was more into it. Still, she wouldn't go all the way with me. But I knew it was just a matter of time. Tyson's eyes filled with tears, and Devon felt a twisted joy. We met whenever we could, and eventually I fell in love with her. I wanted all of her, not just bits and pieces. I came here to ask her to leave you. I wanted to marry her and make her truly happy. Devon's joy faded. You know what she told me? She wouldn't because she loved you. How could she love you? But still be with me on the side. He shook his head, thinking of their last meeting. I thought if we made love, she'd see we were meant for each other. So I took her on your bed after she told me to go, or she'd call the police. She should have loved me, he muttered. That night you went to the party. Devon turned to kick Tyson, but a big fist hit his face instead. The fist hit him again. Something broke and lights flashed. He opened one eye and saw Tyson falling to his knees to drain to continue. Devon smiled, thinking he'd make Tyson pay for those hits, but then a powerful blow knocked him to the ground and he passed out. Tyson rocked on his knees, feeling drained. There was something he needed to do. Red and blue lights flashed outside his door with nothing left in him. He collapsed and blacked out before hitting the floor. Tyson woke in a hospital bed, dim lights around him. Panic hit as he tried to remember if he'd left the hospital after the accident. His sense of time was a mess, but the pain now was nothing compared to what he'd felt before. His heartache was too much to bear. Devon's confession had shocked him, and the emotional knife it drove into him stayed. Each breath hurt. I'm sorry, sugar. I'm so sorry. He couldn't handle her now. He closed his eyes, trying to think of something else, but she stayed, looking too beautiful to bear. He turned his face away. Go away, he whispered. I can't. Why? He yelled. The question echoed in his mind. He needed answers, but he knew he wouldn't get them, not from a creation in his head. Mr. Kane, are you awake? He looked to the door. A nurse came in looking concerned. He felt tears and tried to reach for the tissues. The nurse handed the box to him. Once his face was dry, he nodded. Yes, thank you. Sorry for yelling. She gave him a sad smile. It's okay. You've had a tough time. He smiled weakly. It wasn't all bad. I rediscovered biking. I saw my friends at the university. Okay, the ending wasn't great. He shifted in bed. Did Wilson break any bones? No, just bruises. A lot of them, but nothing serious. They're keeping you overnight because you passed out. Dr. Wilson, on the other hand, has broken bones in both hands and a broken nose. His face is scratched up. He looks a mess. Not sure what happened to his groin, but I saw some worried faces on the other doctors. Tyson's face fell. Wilson hurt my wife. The nurse gasped. How do you know? He bragged about it. He didn't understand why that didn't win her love. A tissue touched his cheek. Was he crying again? He tried to stop the tears, but they kept coming. The nurse stayed with him until he fell asleep again. The next morning, Tyson sat in a wheelchair at the hospital exit, arguing with the staff, who insisted he get a ride home. He argued he couldn't. He grew more upset until Miranda appeared. He looked up at her in relief. It's okay, we've got him, she said to the office worker, pointing over her shoulder. Raoul was waiting in his pickup outside. The clerk nodded and walked away. Tyson looked at Miranda with worry. I can't. She patted his shoulder. I know how bad is the pain. He blinked. I'm sore, but I can walk. If you can walk, you can ride your bike, she said, and led him outside. Raoul was taking Tyson's bike out of the truck. Tyson smiled gratefully at Miranda, and she gave him a big smile. Back then, he looked confused. How did you get my bike from my house? After the ambulances took you and Wilson away, I used your keys from the counter to lock your house. Raul picked me up and took me to the hospital, but they wouldn't let me see you. This morning I called to find out when you'd be released. We then picked up your bike, helmet, and gloves from your place and locked up again. Miranda took his hand when he drove past me on the road. He almost hit me and he was so angry. I had a bad feeling, so I rode back and found him standing over you. I didn't think before I attacked him. He threw me off and was going to hurt me too. When you stopped him, when you told me to run, I only went as far as the driveway where I called the police. He didn't follow, so I went back to the door and listened as I waited for the police. I gave a statement after you were taken away and told them everything I heard. Tyson held her gaze. The police know he hurt her. Miranda nodded, and after a moment, Tyson gave a quick nod. He put on his gloves and helmet while Raul got Miranda's bike from the truck, too. Raul waved to them and drove off. Tyson slowly got on his bike and took deep breaths to calm his shaking muscles. Aside from the aches from his bruises, he thought he was okay. He followed Miranda out of the driveway and across town to the lake path. He loved this familiar road and was glad they didn't have to worry about cars. Miranda was happy to ride in silence with him. Soon they reached the lakefront road and stopped at his driveway. Thanks so much for bringing the bike to the hospital. I didn't want to walk all the way home, he said, holding out his hand for his keys. My bag's inside, she said. Your bag? He asked. I talked to Christy and told her everything that happened. We both think you shouldn't be alone tonight. Christy is still out of town, so I'm going to stay with you. Tyson frowned. I've been alone for 6 years I don't need. It's different now. I wish I could have been there with you last night. You shouldn't have had to deal with that news alone, Miranda said softly. Tyson took a deep breath as his chest tightened. She saw this and touched his arm as she walked her bike to the front door. She pulled the keys from her pocket and unlocked the door. She leaned her bike against the wall inside, and Tyson brought his bike in and placed it next to hers. You don't have a garage? Is this where you'll keep your bike? Miranda asked. Tyson was feeling a bit annoyed about being told what to do by Christy and Miranda, so he just nodded shortly. For now. He walked across the living room to his bedroom and grabbed some shorts and a t-shirt before heading into the bathroom and closing the door. He took off his clothes and stepped into the shower. He wanted to wash off the hospital, smell the water, stung his bruises, and he hissed in pain, but he kept going and cleaned his hair and body. Tyson's muscles shook when he turned off the water and stepped out. He leaned against the counter, trying to catch his breath. Between the beating last night for sleep and pushing himself to ride home, his body was exhausted. He tried to pull his shorts on, but dropped them instead. Damn it! The bathroom door opened and Miranda looked at him with concern. Don't you knock, he said in a shaky voice. You moaned through your shower and you look like you're about to fall. You've done enough today. Besides, I've seen you without clothes before, she said firmly. She moved next to him, put her arm around his back, and had him put his arm over her shoulder. Miranda led him out of the bathroom and into his bed. You appear weary. You need to rest, she remarked. Tyson wanted to protest, but he realized she was correct. Do you want something to relieve the pain? She inquired as she drew the sheets down. No, I'm tired of feeling drugged, he muttered, as his tiredness overtook him. He slid under the covers slowly, feeling each bruise. He protested before sighing and lying back on the pillow. His eyes were already closing when he felt soft lips pressing against his forehead. He managed to open his eyes slightly to see Miranda blushing beside the bed. Then he let sleep overtake him. She awoke him later to serve him dinner, soup, and bread. Then he fell back to sleep. When he awoke again, the house was dark, but he felt warm in the bed beside him. He noticed dark hair on the pillow next to him and Miranda's peaceful expression asleep. He quietly got out of bed, suppressing groans from his aching muscles. He exited the bedroom and softly closed the door. He walked to the patio doors overlooking his backyard and gazed at the dark lake beyond. The moonlight shone just enough to reveal the end of his property, where the water began. The water does not want you. He sighed, knowing his mind would bring her up. He had questions, but knew he would only get answers he already knew. Still, he felt the need to speak them. He glanced to his right, and Imani was standing next to him in her nightgown. So beautiful, so sad. He looked back at the lake. He didn't want to see her sad. It hurt him just as much. "It seems you didn't need me either," he said quietly. "I always needed you. I'm on." His voice protested softly. "But I wasn't enough. I was selfish." Tyson's eyebrows rose. He hadn't expected that response. At hospital parties, he saw how much Imani enjoyed attention from other men. He realized he might have seen that as selfishness. "And I wasn't good-looking enough. You wanted that too. You wanted to be with him." He forced out. "I love you," she whispered. "But you were with him, something you refused to do with me." He spat. He suddenly understood. "Is that why you didn't do it with me?" "Yes," she said quietly, sounding ashamed. He shook his head hard. His thoughts were running wild. He couldn't be sure if she was ashamed. Maybe she was just sorry she got caught. She'd never admitted it before. He remembered what she said in the car that night. She had been angry and accused him of cheating, a hypocrite. He snapped. "I'm sorry. I was afraid." "Afraid? Where did that come from? That's not true." He refused to believe it. "You were so busy with your work I felt left out. I couldn't be part of that part of your life." He knew she felt a little intimidated by his job, but he told her she didn't have to pretend to like math just for him. He accepted their differences. Tyson thought about their marriage and looked at his own behavior. Had he been neglectful, he remembered the kisses and hugs he'd given her as she was getting ready in the morning. The giggles, and how she'd push him away. It didn't happen every morning, and maybe it happened less in the last year of their marriage. But she never said she felt neglected. He shook his head. This didn't explain her cheating. He was grasping at straws. "That doesn't excuse what you did." "I know." She sighed, sounding full of regret. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. He had to stop imagining her feelings. It was just him hoping for things that weren't true. "I want you to leave," he said, and looked at Imani, but Miranda was standing there instead. "Oh," he started. "Can I wait until morning?" she said quietly. "Morning? Oh, I wasn't talking to you. You can stay," he corrected himself. Miranda's brows furrowed as she looked closer at him. "Who are you talking to?" He exhaled. He didn't want to drag more people into his problems, but he couldn't see another way. "My wife, or rather my mind, which brings her image to me sometimes for awkward conversations like this." Miranda's eyes widened as she looked around the room. "You see her now?" "No, she's gone. I'm no longer seeing things." "I don't believe in ghosts," he insisted. Miranda shivered and made the sign of the cross. "My mother saw her mother after she passed away. She gave my mother some good advice. She visits from time to time, but only to my mother." She locked eyes with Tyson. We believe he suddenly felt very tired. He didn't want to argue. "I'm going back to bed." Miranda took his hand and followed him back to the bedroom. They both got under the covers and snuggled in. Miranda turned onto her side, her back to him, but pulled his arm around her. He tried to pull back, but she pulled him closer. She held his hand close and kissed each fingertip. Her gentle actions stirred feelings in him that were hard to ignore. She moaned softly, and their bodies fit together. He tried to stop himself, knowing he shouldn't, but her movements were persistent. Before he could say anything, she guided him closer, and their connection deepened. "Tyson's so good." She exhaled. He felt caught in the moment, as it felt too good to think clearly. Her warmth made him want more. In a swift move, he shifted to a better position over her, making their connection even stronger. "Oh, yes! Harder!" she cried, and he couldn't resist. The ache in his muscles was there, but so was his need for her. The room filled with their sounds. "Oh, Tyson, I'm coming!" she squeaked. He sped up, not sure how much longer he could last. The feeling grew stronger until he couldn't hold back anymore. "Spank me?" she asked, her body trembling. It was too much for him. He held her tight as he felt himself let go. Overwhelmed by the sensation, Tyson's body pressed against her, but soon his muscles grew tired, and he slumped beside her. He pulled away, and she quickly slipped under the covers. He felt a sudden warmth as she cleaned him. She then went to the bathroom for a bit. When Miranda returned, she cuddled up to him under the blankets. She soon fell asleep, her breathing slow and soft. Tyson, however, could not sleep. He lay there, her breath warm on his chest as his mind raced with thoughts about his life. I like her, said her voice. He looked up and saw Imani at the end of the bed, her eyes sad but lovely. He glanced down at Miranda, saw her drooling slightly on his chest, and then looked back at Imani. You can move on now, he whispered. No, not yet. Why? He asked, confused. I can't tell you, she replied with a pout. His eyebrows rose at her mysterious response. Soon? He asked. She nodded and smiled briefly, and then she was gone. Tyson felt oddly good. A new sense of calm came over him. He actually began to look forward to the day. Who knew what might happen? Tyson's heart pounded as he gasped for air. Grinning at Miranda, the morning sun made her face glow with joy. You're getting too good for me, old man, Miranda teased. He laughed as they coasted the last block to the university on their bikes. He had started loving cycling again. It was part of his exercise routine and his way of traveling from his home by the lake to the university. Tyson's life was getting better after 6 long years. In the last 10 months, he'd started to fit back into his old life. The university welcomed him with open arms and gave him a new office near George. Though it used to be a storage room, it got fixed up nicely. George was simply happy to have Tyson back. Not caring that Tyson's new office had more space and even a shower instead of a parking spot. Tyson had a bike locker. His PTSD kept him from driving. He didn't mind. He loved biking, no matter the weather. He even got a mountain bike to go into town for groceries. It made him healthier and saved money on deliveries. Every day, Tyson and Miranda raced to the campus. It had taken Tyson a while to keep up with her, but he was winning more now. Miranda and Tyson shared a love for cycling, but not a bed anymore. She had a new boyfriend who treated her well. Tyson was happy for her. Christy was doing great in New York. She emailed him regularly about her career. Her company might expand into Europe soon, starting with Paris. She was very excited. On her last visit, Christy mentioned she had started dating someone. This made Tyson uneasy, especially after they had spent a passionate evening together. She admitted her new man wasn't great in bed and even compared him to Tyson. They decided it was best to end the physical part of their relationship, coming back from his thoughts. Tyson waved to Miranda as he turned towards his building and she continued on our way. He parked his bike, changed his shoes, locked up the cabinet, and walked into the building. Good morning, Leona. Felicity. He greeted the women in the admin office. Good morning, Mr. Kane, they said together. He raised an eyebrow and they giggled. Good morning, Tyson, they corrected. He nodded with a smile and continued to his office. He peeked into George's office. Good morning, Gail. Is George still in bed? He joked. And how would I know that? She replied with a stern look. Tyson laughed, knowing they never crossed that line. Gail was a private person with no known love interest. She seemed happy as she was. Although Tyson didn't fully understand asexuality, he respected her choices. Still, teasing his friends was fun. You handle so much of his life. I just thought you went to his house each morning to drag him out of bed. He is helpless without you. You might be right, but I only help him here. She sighed, helpless. A gruff voice said from behind Tyson. He turned to see George standing there in a wrinkled suit with bloodshot eyes. Tyson's eyebrows rose in surprise. What happened to you? Move out of my doorway and I might tell you. George grumbled, trying hard not to stare at Tyson's muscles. George felt embarrassed because he was chubby. He liked it more when Tyson was also heavier. Tyson stepped aside and George walked in, dropping his briefcase on a chair. The shorter man yawned. I was in a video call with Yuri from Russia and Gustav from Sweden. They had some interesting questions. We talked all night. Not very responsible, Gail said. He rubbed his face. I know, but it was so exciting. His tired eyes lit up a bit. Go rest. I'll cancel your first class. Gail sighed. See? Helpless, Tyson said, laughing as he walked to his office. He heard Gail chuckling and George groaning. Tyson unlocked his office door and closed it. He went to the wardrobe he had in his office. Inside were clothes for a whole week. He rode his bike to work on weekends, bringing new clothes and taking dirty ones home. The wardrobe had 5 dress shirts and 3 pairs of dress pants. The drawer at the bottom held his underwear, socks, and 2 pairs of loafers. Tyson didn't care much about fashion, so his clothes were simple. His shirts were plain white, gray, black, dark blue, and red. The pants were all black and stretchy because his leg muscles were too big for regular pants. Tyson grabbed underwear and went to the washroom. He quickly undressed and got into the shower. He rinsed his cycling clothes, wrung them out, and hung them on a small line to drip dry. There was no need to rush because his first class wasn't until 10. Still, he washed quickly and stepped out. He dried himself fast, too. Once he put on his briefs, he sighed with relief. Lately, he had visitors during his morning shower, twice that week and twice the week before. 2 women, Leona and Felicity, had shown up. Both said they were single and interested in him. He should have turned them away the first time, but they weren't in his classes and promised to be discreet. Today it seemed like he had the morning to himself. He wasn't sure if he felt happy or relieved. He had a deodorant and stepped out of the bathroom. He stopped as he saw a dark-haired woman sitting on the couch by his door. She wore black-rimmed glasses, a tweed jacket, a black t-shirt, jeans with tears, and black boots. She was holding her phone as if reading something. She turned it towards him and touched the screen. Did you just take a picture of me?" he asked quietly but sharply. She looked surprised. Finally, her eyes met his Tyson Kane. He nodded, trying to remember if she was faculty or a student. She hadn't answered this question yet. "I'm Sydney Kolob from the New Yorker magazine. I had an appointment to interview Professor Kane," she said. "Yes, that is me, but no one told me about an interview," he grumbled. She nodded and smiled. "You look different from the photos we found." He exhaled. "Is this about the train accident?" he asked, tired. She nodded, smiling more. Tyson wondered why she was smiling. "Who set up the interview?" he asked. "The dean's office called my editor. Dean McNally is friends with my boss." Tyson grimaced. Now it made sense. He remembered McNally talking about recovering the costs of rehiring him and the office renovations. He thought it meant speaking at a seminar, not a face-to-face with a reporter. He turned to the wardrobe and grabbed a pair of pants, putting them on with his back to her. "I have a class at 10. We should finish the interview before then." "You don't mind if I record it?" she said, smiling confidently. She touched her phone screen a few more times. Tyson shook his head and reached for his white shirt. Then he paused and looked at her. Interview. "Dean McNally said I should see you teach because your methods are different but very effective." "I'm excited to see you teaching," Tyson snorted. "Action. I'm a math teacher, not a gym coach." Sydney laughed. "But you don't look like any math teacher I've ever seen. You look like someone who works out a lot." He sighed and reached for his black shirt. His students liked this color on him. As he buttoned it, he thought about his journey to get fit. He thought he saw her take another picture and frowned. "I've been focusing on exercise since the accident. It took a long time to get better, then I just kept going. Can you tell me what exercises you did to get in such good shape?" she asked. Tyson sat in his chair and put on his socks. He saw no way out of answering, so he just nodded. So the interview began. "That's absolutely correct, Miss DeWitt. Does anyone have any questions on how she worked out the answer?" Tyson looked from the short-haired brunette to the faces of the 23 students in the tiered seats before him. Even Mr. Phillips, who was retaking the class because he failed last year, seemed comfortable and wore his usual smug expression. Tyson looked back at Miss DeWitt and nodded to her, telling her to return to her seat. She added a little extra bounce in her walk, knowing he'd be watching. Her face turned a bit pink as she sat down. She was retaking the course to raise her grade. She'd passed last year but signed up again when she heard he was returning. Tyson knew she had another reason for retaking his class on the first day. She had asked him to grab coffee. She made it clear what she really meant. He told her he'd enjoy coffee but couldn't date students in his class. She asked if he could date a student who had passed his course. He said she would have to score 10 points higher than her last attempt. Then yes, she accepted the challenge. As things were going, she was likely to surpass her grade by 20 points. There were only 2 weeks left, and her flirting was getting bolder. He was glad he taught a course that could be graded on knowledge from tests alone. He didn't bother with class participation or any subjective grading. This semester's batch of students was smart and eager. He addressed the class. "Okay, we have a review next week and then the final. I think we'll see some great grades. Does that mean we can skip review week?" Mr. Phillips blurted. He grinned. "I said I'm hopeful, not stupid. See you all next week." The group chuckled and stood as the bell rang. Tyson leaned back against the desk at the front of the room, feeling a warm satisfaction in his chest. He really did love teaching. As the students left, Sydney approached from where she'd been watching. He was sure she'd taken more pictures of him, too. I get it. You have a unique style of teaching that really seems to reach them. She glanced over her shoulder to see Miss DeWitt step outside, then smiled back at Tyson. I think some are more eager to be reached than others. She looked at him closely, searching for any juicy secrets, but he just waited. She exhaled. Are you going to tell me that you've never been tempted by any of these young students? I'm not going to ruin this school's name with a scandal. I'd never get involved with a student in my course, and I try to gently turn down anyone who shows that kind of interest in me. You said it yourself. They're young. I could be their grandfather, he admitted. Sydney paused to look at him. Wow, I keep forgetting you're almost 60. He smiled gently. I am 60. She blinked, then grinned again. You don't look like any 60-year-old I know. He shrugged. I have to prepare for my next class. Did you get everything you need for the article? Actually, I was hoping we could continue this interview over dinner. I'd like to know more about the changes in your life since the accident, she said hopefully. I have a rental car so I could drive us to any restaurant you'd like. My travel budget would cover dinner. His expression stiffened. I don't travel in cars anymore. I rode my bicycle to work. He saw her interest in that fact and her disappointment. While he wasn't eager to talk about his life, he knew he had to give a good interview for McNally. If you'd like to join me for dinner tonight at my place, I can give you the address. I've got a prime rib roast in the oven. Are you vegan? She flashed a wide smile. Not a vegan. I eat anything and everything. He smiled and nodded. He gave her the address, which she added to her phone. Sydney looked up from her phone. Do you know where I might find George Haley? And can you describe him so I'll recognize him? His office is just up the hall from mine. He looks like a squished version of Einstein, Tyson replied. She chuckled. I've met him then. He's the one who showed me to your office this morning. He told me to wait there. Did he know you'd be almost naked? Tyson rubbed his face and nodded. The man likes to cause trouble? Of course. I just teased him about needing help without his assistant, Gail. This was payback. Your friends? He nodded with a warm smile. Yeah, he's my best. Tyson's smile faded as he remembered the woman who once held that title. He cleared his throat and turned to gather his notes. I'll see you tonight at 7. Sydney watched him. Yes. Tyson nodded once more, signaling her to leave the classroom. He locked it behind them and headed to the restroom. He needed some alone time and assumed Sydney wouldn't follow him there. George looked up at the knock on his door frame. The journalist from this morning stood there smiling. He smiled back. That was a clever trick you played on Tyson at my expense, she said. George chuckled. You're welcome. She grinned, showing she wasn't upset. She entered the office and sat down. It started the interview awkwardly, but it gave me a great angle for the story. My editor will be very happy, so thanks. George nodded with a smile. Who is Tyson Kane's best friend? She asked directly. George's smile faded a bit. These days, that's likely me, so it used to be his wife, she asked. George nodded slightly and she raised an eyebrow. He exhaled. His first best friend was a woman named Ashley Collins. They grew up as neighbors, inseparable until he went to Europe to study. While he was away, she married the man who would later become the university's previous dean, Franklin Dennings. It was Ashley's efforts that got Tyson his job here. He paused, finding his words carefully. The night of the accident at Franklin's retirement party, Ashley's marriage fell apart. She revealed that Franklin was a terrible husband. We all left except for Tyson and Imani. After the accident, Ashley disappeared. Went to Europe, I heard. None of us have heard from her since. George watched the reporter as she processed this information. Finally, she spoke. Childhood friend and wife. Friends or rivals? He grimaced. I'm not going to guess on that, and I strongly advise you not to bring it up with Tyson. The woman watched him, then nodded. She suddenly stood up. Thanks again for the help this morning. George nodded to her and watched her leave. He felt a bit uneasy. He wondered where this story was heading and hoped the dean would review it before publication. For Tyson's sake, Sydney had a lot of great material for a good story. Tyson's changed from a chubby man before the accident to a fit guy afterward, and his great teaching skills made for interesting reading. She needed some background on what he was like before the accident, and his old best friend. She stopped to talk to the two women in the small admin office. "Hi, I'm Sydney Colombo from the New Yorker magazine. I'm doing a story on Tyson Kane." Both women smiled widely. They seemed to like Tyson a lot. "I've spoken to George Haley, but I need more sources to get information on how Tyson was before the accident." The two women looked at each other, and one of them had an idea. She turned to her co-worker, Mrs. Cromwell. The other woman nodded quickly. The first woman looked back at Sydney. Mrs. Cromwell was the head of human resources for years, but now works in the library. She knows everything about everyone. "Thanks," Sydney said, and waved as she left the office. She had someone new to talk to after his last class. Tyson hurried back to his office to change into his cycling clothes. He was meeting Miranda by the east gate of the campus. She'd texted him earlier saying she had a surprise for their ride. They were going for longer rides after school, now exploring the country roads. As he opened the bathroom door, he came face to face with Felicity. She looked up at him with a guilty expression. "Felicity? What is wrong?" he asked. "That writer from the magazine. The one doing the story on you," she said. He nodded. "She was asking for the name of someone who worked with you before the accident." She took a deep breath. "We gave her Mrs. Cromwell's name." Tyson closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "One of my friends texted me saying they heard them talking about Devon Wilson in the library." Felicity looked upset. Tyson clenched his teeth at the mention of Devon's name. He despised the man. Devon had betrayed him deeply, and Imani had helped him with that betrayal. His mood darkened, and suddenly Felicity was hugging him tightly. "I'm so sorry," Felicity cried against his chest. Tyson looked down into her dark brown eyes and saw her regret. His heart softened just a little. Tyson gasped. Felicity slowly opened her mouth and took him in deeper and deeper until he was in her throat, with her face close to him. Tyson couldn't tell if she needed air when he felt her eyelashes tickling his stomach. He pulled her back to let her breathe. She pulled him down towards her again. They did this back and forth until he felt he was close to releasing. Felicity noticed, too, and her movements became desperate. Tyson put his hands on her head and moved steadily. She reached inside her yoga pants with one hand and beneath her sweater with the other, touching herself. She squealed quickly as she climaxed. Tyson held her against his body as he finished feeling intense pleasure. He enjoyed the moment, then gently pulled away as she cleaned him off. When she was done, she sighed and looked up at him with a hungry look. He smiled, shaking his head. She always wanted more. He glanced at the clock and realized he was going to be late. "Oh, she'll leave without me," he said. He helped Felicity up, pulled up his shorts and kissed her, leaving her with a cute smile. He wasn't sure what it meant, but had no time to ask. "You were great. Can you lock up when you leave the office?" Workers had keys, so he wasn't worried. Felicity nodded, biting her lip playfully. He wondered what was amusing her, but ignored it, nodding to her. He put on his shoes and ran down the hall. He stopped at George's office, where George was talking to Gail. Both froze when they saw him. "Good night," he said, rushing off. He thought Gail called out, but he was too late to stop. Checking his phone, he saw a message from Miranda heading east on 18. "Catch up." She had just left. He'd need to hurry, but it was possible. He ran to the bike locker and unlocked it. Professor Kane, he turned and saw Miss DeWitt standing there with books. She looked surprised by something on his face. He quickly switched to his cycling shoes, putting away his other shoes, and asked, "Yes." She didn't speak at first, so he looked back at her while tightening his shoes. "I'm really late. Can it wait until Monday?" She bit her lip but didn't look amused. Instead, she seemed a bit teary as she looked at his mouth. "Monday?" he asked. "Strange behavior?" "Yes," she said softly. "Great. See you then." He pulled out his bike, locked the locker, and checked his bike. Time to go. He smiled at her once more, then jumped on his bike and sped away. He rode through the town to the highway, pedaling fast. He needed to catch Miranda before the first big hill or she'd get away on the downhill. Tyson didn't know his speed, but the world flew by. He loved his Cannondale bike. Its strong frame made sure his energy went right to the pedals, speeding him up. Despite his big muscles, biking made him feel light and graceful. Every movement felt powerful and smooth. As he neared the hill, he saw Miranda ahead. The hill wasn't steep, but it was long and tiring. If he couldn't catch her now, she'd win. Not today, he thought with a grin. Using a small dip for speed, he charged up the hill. He shifted gears smoothly, keeping his speed steady until he passed her at the top. He raised a fist in victory as if he'd just won a major bike race. He stopped at a turnout and realized some other cyclists were watching. They smiled at him in a funny way. Miranda pulled up next to him and gave him a tissue from her jersey pocket. "You've got a lot of black lipstick on, Felicity. Is that why you're late?" He was surprised by her sharp tone as he wiped his lips. The tissue showed a lot of lipstick. "Sorry I got delayed, but left as soon as I could." He put the tissue in his pocket. She growled in frustration and took another tissue, wiping his chin. "If you follow those kisses down, where do they lead?" joked one of the men. The young woman next to Tyson gave him a playful slap while everyone else laughed. Tyson caught Miranda's hand and looked at her with a puzzled expression. She just pulled her hand back, leaving him with a tissue. He wiped his chin absent-mindedly as he waited for an explanation for her actions. "I think Professor Kane can clean his own face," Miranda said, a male cyclist nearby looking between the two of them. Tyson turned to the group of cyclists. "Is this the surprise you were talking about?" he asked, trying to ease the tension and understand the situation. A young man offered his hand to Tyson. "Hi, I'm Kendrick, Miranda's boyfriend," Tyson thought as he smiled and shook Ken's hand. "Nice to meet you. Please call me Tyson. Miranda told me about you too. Congrats." Ken nodded politely but still seemed uneasy about his girlfriend. Another couple rolled closer. It was the joke cracker and the slapper from earlier. "I'm Tim and this lovely lady is Penny." Tyson nodded and smiled at them. The last two cyclists seemed eager to continue. "David and Riley," the last man said, "we're losing daylight." Tyson nodded and signaled that they could get going. The route was clear, so they started riding again. Tyson knew he would have to wait for an explanation from Miranda. The other side of the hill had a winding downhill path. Tyson wasn't very good with descents, so he rode slower than the others who seemed very skilled at it. When they reached the valley, he had to pedal hard to catch up, but once they hit the long, straight stretches and curves in the valley, Tyson's strength and stamina paid off, and he left the others behind. There was a rest stop at the junction of Highway 18 and County Road 10. It had a small gas station and snack shop where cyclists rested. Tyson bought some mixed nuts and dried fruit and refilled his water bottle from a spring water tap. Tim walked up to him with a grin. "I have to say I was worried you'd slow us down on that descent, but wow, I couldn't keep up with you on the flat areas. How did you get so strong and get such good endurance?" Tyson laughed. "Yeah, I'm not great at going downhill. I'm better at climbing and riding on flat ground." He thought for a moment. "Maybe if there was a straight descent I could manage." He shrugged. "I do strength training and swim every day." "Weren't you pretty messed up in that train accident?" David asked bluntly, and Riley gave him an annoyed look. What he was, he defended. Tyson sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I've got a lot of titanium pins and screws in me. They probably wouldn't let me through airport security." "So how did you do it?" David pressed, not liking being outdone by an older guy. Taking a deep breath, Tyson focused on David's frustrated face. "I had to recover from the wreck my body had become. The physical therapy was extremely painful and felt endless, but I kept at it. I had to learn to walk again, and I'll never be able to jog or run. My doctors told me to stop all high-impact exercises. Miranda got me back into cycling. I'd never had a bike like this one before. It was a gift from another friend." Miranda smiled at him but looked away when Ken glanced at her. Tyson worried that he was causing problems for the couple. "After I left the hospital, I started swimming in the lake near my house every day. I'd swim until I couldn't anymore." He paused, knowing he couldn't share his true reason for swimming. "Anyway, my endurance and lung capacity are probably from swimming." He looked David in the eye. "I don't stop when it hurts. I push through the pain. That's what I do." He shrugged. That seemed to calm David. He walked back to his bike. "Who's Felicity?" Penny asked with a cheeky grin. Tyson just smiled and shook his head, making Penny pout. "How old are you?" Riley asked cautiously. "I just turned 60. Riley smiled. So there's hope for us if we keep exercising. Exercise is like a fountain of youth. I believe it helps. Tyson agreed. A good diet also matters. Give your body what it needs and no more. The rest depends on your genes. And that part's a mystery to me. The group laughed. They continued riding, and Tyson enjoyed cycling with a group for the first time at the second and final rest stop. A small park at the crossroads of County Road 10 and Highway 23. Tyson learned more about the others. They were from a bike club. Miranda had tried to join when the club organizers wouldn't let her join the second time. Ken and the others left the club to join her. They were tired of the club's strict rules and wanted to have fun. Tyson could relate to that and enjoyed the ride even more. Highway 23 had a wide paved shoulder all the way back to town, so even with traffic, they stayed safe. As they neared the town, David and Riley waved and headed to their home. Shortly after, Tim and Penny waved and rode away too. Tyson needed to talk to Ken and Miranda before they left. Can we stop for a moment? Ken nodded and they stopped in a gas station parking lot. Tyson turned to Miranda. I really enjoyed the surprise of riding with a group, so thank you very much for that, Tyson said. Ken and Miranda nodded, but they stayed quiet, sensing there was more to come. I noticed my presence has created some tension between you two. I'm not sure why, but I don't want to cause any problems. I won't be joining your group, Tyson added. No, you have to join, Miranda said firmly. Ken looked confused. Is there something you need to tell me? He asked Miranda. Miranda looked nervous. What do you mean? Why did you act jealous when he showed up with lipstick on his face? Ken asked. I'd like to know why. Tyson noticed Ken's worry. It seemed Miranda hadn't told Ken about her past with Tyson. They had been close, but that was over months ago. Miranda's face turned serious. Tyson sighed. They needed to be honest. Miranda and I are just friends now. Ken looked at Tyson now. Tyson nodded. We met last year. Miranda got me into cycling. It saved me from staying alone at home. I was going through a tough time. We were close, but both knew it wouldn't be more than that. When she told me she liked someone new, we ended the physical part of our relationship but stayed friends. Tyson gazed at Miranda. That's my side, Miranda. She was embarrassed. Her cheeks red and eyes wet. Clearing her throat, she spoke. I was surprised by my reaction today. I hadn't seen any signs of Tyson with someone else before. I know we're not like that anymore, but my heart wasn't ready. Ken's eyebrows furrowed. You're in love with him. Why start something with me then? Were you simply using me? He asked fiercely. No, I am not using you. I like you and want to see where this goes. Miranda spoke strongly. She looked at Tyson. It is difficult to let go of feelings for someone you were close to. I'm new to this. There is no handbook. Tyson nodded. I'm sorry too. I should have resisted more. I will not jeopardize what may be a beautiful relationship. You two are an excellent couple. You need to be honest about this. If you still want me in the bike group, you know where I can be found. Thank you for the ride tonight. It was enjoyable. Tyson extended his hand to Ken, who shook it a moment later. He nodded quickly to Miranda before riding away, enjoying the rest of the voyage. He checked the time and realized he had 1 hour before his guest arrived. He sighed in relief. He remembered Felicity telling him about Sydney's queries to Mrs. Cromwell, a well-known gossip who had left the gathering last. He suddenly found himself not looking forward to this evening as much. The tiny prime rib roast smelled delicious. When he removed it from the oven, it looked as good as it smelled. The roast potatoes were crisp and golden, while the small carrots were soft. There was only enough food for two, so he didn't need to cook anything else. Fresh bread and butter were already on the table. He checked on the dessert. Fresh strawberries, angel food cake with authentic whipped cream. He heard the crunch of gravel in his driveway, indicating that his guest had arrived. He approached the door and watched Sydney step out of her rented car. She grinned at him. She had changed into a yellow sundress with broad orange stripes on it. The dress slipped a little over her contours. She wore tan sandals with straps that went up to her ankles. She carried a bottle of red wine. Tyson smiled as he continued, You look lovely tonight. You didn't need to bring alcohol. Sydney walked up the steps and gave him the bottle. Always bring something when you visit, she remarked with a smile. He saw that the wine was chilly. Come in, please. He held the door for her. She looked around. Your home is gorgeous. It's bigger than I expected. Is it a two-bedroom? She asked. Thank you. Yes, it is, Tyson responded. How did you acquire one of these homes? By the lake? She asked. I inherited it from my parents, he explained simply. Dinner's ready. Her smile widened. It smells amazing. It's prime rib. Do you want some hot mustard, steak sauce, or something else? He asked. How do you eat it? She asked again. Ah, juice, he responded. She grinned and nodded. I will have that as well. Tyson motioned for her to seat before filling 2 plates and bringing them to the table. Oh my goodness, this smells fantastic. Where did you learn how to cook? She asked. I was the only child, and both my parents worked. My mother taught me how to cook. It came in helpful while I was studying in England. None of my dorm mates knew how to cook, so I prepared meals for them, he explained. Dorm mates? She inquired with a raised eyebrow. He smiled shyly. It's simply what we dubbed our group. We liked how it reminded us of an old Weber pilot barracks, according to one mathematician. He opened the wine and poured it for them. They took their first nibbles, smiling as the tender roast melted in their mouths. Would you mind if I asked you some questions regarding your early years after moving back? Sydney asked. He took another bite and considered it. After swallowing, he stared at her. I may or may not respond, but you are welcome to ask. They both sipped their wine and agreed. It worked wonderfully with the dinner. Sydney began after you returned from Europe. You discovered that your dearest friend Ashley Collins had married. Were you both ever involved? He gazed at her. So, I see we're getting into the tough stuff. The woman smiled and observed him. He exhaled. No, it did not happen. But you would not have refused. Tyson stared at her. This is a meaningless question. There was no chance then. When I returned, she was married. I met a Manny and fell in love. We got married. Ashley's marriage ended after more than 20 years together. The accident occurred and took him on. Ashley had vanished somewhere in Europe, according to what I learned in the hospital. It is over. She received a new start. So did I. Sydney shifted her strategy for a time and asked him generic questions. Something that could be used to fill out an article. Questions about how he grew up and the tricks a math nerd learned while hanging around with Ashley. As the talk proceeded, they enjoyed their lunch. Sydney finally gazed around the room, taking in all of the images. I recognize your wife in several of these photographs. She was quite lovely. Tyson simply nodded and continued to eat. I don't recognize the young blonde in the pictures, she added, pointing to Christy's photos. He took a quick peek at them before returning to his plate. Christy Taylor is a friend. She helped me overcome some of my shyness. Another acquaintance, Miranda Moreno, suggested that I use riding to get around. Christy paid for the bike I ride to university. He laughed as he remembered the quarrel they'd had about him paying for her bike. She was a strong-willed young woman. He spotted Sydney looking at his smile with a knowing gleam in her eyes. How about you? Is there somebody special in your life? He aggressively asked to shift the subject, and her smile widened. Yes, I've been married 3 years. Her name is Phoebe. She is a nurse. She held his eyes as a challenge. A nurse from New York City. Must be a difficult job. He spoke, and she nodded. Satisfied? He was not going to respond negatively. It's refreshing to see someone your age be so open-minded, she said. Tyson laughed. I'm glad to see someone realizing my actual age. She snorted. To observe indications of aging, you must look closely. Keep doing whatever you're doing to stay young and teach others how to do the same. You will be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. He shrugged as he used a dinner roll to finish the rest of his meal. I have enough money to last for the rest of my life. I live simply. Therefore, my expenses are limited. He stared at the journalist. I've got fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and real whipped cream for dessert. She nodded joyfully as he cleared their plates and brought the dessert ingredients to the table. They prepared their own meals and savored the sweet delight. Tyson cleared the dishes, and Sydney moved to the living room couch with her refilled wine glass. He joined her with his drink, and they sat on the sofa facing each other. Sydney flashed him a slight smile. You seem to be waiting for this. Next question. Devon Wilson. Tyson gritted his teeth, unconsciously. She noticed his jaw clench. You do not like the man, she added gently. Tyson snorted at her understatement. No, I do not like him. I despise him and his actions, and the affair he had with Imani hurts me deeply. I want him to be recognized for what he is. You filed charges? Sydney asked. Tyson nodded. I don't expect much from the courts because all I have for evidence is his confession. Imani never informed me about the affair. His memory replayed the image of Armani's eyes 1 second before the train hit. The sensation in her eyes was guilt, but he was aware that his recollections were being influenced by his current understanding. Nonetheless, the abrupt remembrance froze his muscles. Tyson, are you okay? Sydney's tense voice cut through the buzzing in his mind, and he blinked, opening his eyes to see her bending over him with a troubled frown. He felt his muscles trembling and attempted to relax. Yes, sorry. What happened? She inquired, as she cautiously sat on the couch next to him. Flashback. I got a flashback of the accident. The last time I spoke with Imani, we were bickering about Ashley. Imani accused me of harboring feelings for her. What a case of blaming the victim, Sydney exclaimed. Tyson arched a sharp eyebrow at her. Sorry, she replied meekly. Tyson felt slightly less unsteady. He nodded. I was outraged, so I confronted her about her behavior around Devon shortly before the tragedy. He hadn't intended to reveal this, but his tongue was on autopilot. Oh no, I'm so sorry, Sydney gasped softly, stunned by his confession. Have you got enough for your article? Would you mind if we ended the evening now? I'm a bit fatigued, Tyson asked. He needed to stop speaking. Okay, yeah. Yes, I have enough, she replied. Tyson stood and led Sydney to the door. The woman turned and hugged Tyson. Tyson, you're a good dude, it's only my opinion, but you deserved none of it, she said. He gave her a hug in response. Thank you, stay safe out there. With one final gaze in his eyes, she nodded and exited his home. He watched as she drove away. He bolted the door and picked up the empty wine glasses. He carried them into the kitchen. He washed the dishes and cleaned up. He ended with half a bottle of wine left. He poured another glass. He switched off the lights and sat on the couch. He observed the flames in the wood stove. He sipped the wine, attempting to concentrate exclusively on the fire. I hurt you? He exhaled. Her voice cut him like a knife. Yes, he was too exhausted to fight the voice tonight. It was not my intention. He observed the flames on the wood. They felt safer than listening to her. It didn't matter what you meant. You've ruined everything. You ruined me. He spoke regretfully. No, you are better now. He frowned at Imani, who sat on the opposite end of the couch. She was lovely, but also extremely sad. Sorry you didn't survive the crash to appreciate this. He pointed to himself. She averted her gaze, allowing a tear to fall down her face. Tyson rose up angrily and marched to the patio doors and out into the backyard. He descended to the sand and gazed at the silent waters. The sun had set, but there was still some light. He looked up to the clear sky. The air was very calm tonight. He relaxed by taking deep breaths and allowing himself to be calm. Then he could think clearly again. His mind was playing tricks on him tonight. The terror was too intense. I apologize. Please stop saying that, he whispered. He looked to the side, and Imani stood there, visibly upset. He turned to face her. Listen, I do not want to be angry anymore. I loved you. Yes, you have betrayed me. However, anger will not solve the problem at hand. I just need you to go away. It's been 7 years. Please go. I cannot. Not yet. He turned back to the water. Damn, the lake does not want you. I know, I don't need to hear it again. He exhaled, and she was gone. He was alone. He admitted to himself that he was struggling to ignore these visions. He wondered if he was losing his mind. He hoped not. It would be so sad to go through all this pain and grief to get his life back, only to go crazy now. For Tyson, the month after Sydney's interview settled into a routine. Final exams came and went, and his students did well. Miss DeWitt improved her score by 22 points. She got a perfect grade and was very happy. She was celebrating her graduation with 2 weeks in France, but planned to visit Tyson for the promised treat when she returned. Miranda sent him an email apology. She said she would not be able to ride with him for a while. She was working on her relationship with Ken, who felt a bit threatened by her closeness to Tyson. He told her he understood, though he was sad to lose a riding buddy. Her relationship with her boyfriend was more important on a solo weekend ride on the same route where he'd met Ken and his friends. Tyson came across the town's cycling club. About 18 cyclists, mostly young men, caught up to him at the base of a hill and tried to leave him behind. He pushed forward, moving through the group. A few stayed close to him, but he outpaced them all. When he reached the front, he left them behind one by one until only one cyclist stayed with him as he rolled into a small gas station. The young man was too tired to speak, so Tyson went inside to buy some dried fruit and nuts. The group arrived slowly as Tyson refilled his water bottle. He smiled at them as they watched him snack. One of the young men, the first heat out, paced on the flat section, came up to him. "I'm Peter Hamlin, president of this cycling club. You really surprised us. None of us expected you to be so fast or to keep up that pace for so long. Did you leave all of us behind? Tyson Kane, one of you stayed with me." Tyson pointed to a man resting under a tree. That guy, he was determined. Peter's face turned red. Tyson raised an eyebrow. Tyson Kane, the professor. "You're old," Peter shouted, and the others looked over. Tyson grinned. "And never mind, I was about to ask you to join our club," Peter snapped. "So you were amazed with my skills, but now that you know my age, you do not desire me." Ken was correct. This club is lame. Tyson shrugged and went to his bike. He filled up his bottle, hopped on his bike, waved, and rode away. He was definitely loving his newfound freedom. He did not want to return to driving an automobile. He wouldn't have to make weekend visits to the university this summer, giving him more time for personal rides. He was considering going bike camping that summer. He had free time. Riding by the hospital, he smiled, recalling the news that Devon Wilson no longer worked there. Being charged with assaulting one of the hospital's favorite administrators enraged many of the female workers who had been mistreated by the former chief surgeon. Additional charges were made against him. This time, the hospital's upper management did not protect him. He was sacked and was unlikely to get another position at a hospital. Tyson stopped for ice cream and recalled his first journey with Miranda. He smiled. She and Christy had gotten him out of the jail he had created for himself. He hadn't even attempted to escape on his own. He had been locked in a dreary routine, and if they hadn't helped him, he might still be. He rode home gently, simply enjoying the day. He had no plan. Perhaps he'd cook a BBQ for dinner. He would have invited George, but the latter was in Austria visiting friends and colleagues, and it was Tyson's whole social circle. One friend was a little depressed. His neighbor, Barbara Willoughby, was visiting one of her children. He thought of Christy, who was pursuing her goal in New York City. Miranda and her boyfriend were driving cross-country. Even Leona and Felicity were away during the summer. He was unsure whether they would return in the fall. Tyson was feeling lonely. He had been alone for 5 years and it hadn't worried him, but suddenly he needed people again. He missed Imani. Even in his fantasies, she had not appeared since his meal with the journalist. He wished he could speak to the real Imani, not just an image in his imagination. He wanted to know why she left. There was no evidence of the article Sydney had written. He was beginning to worry about its release and was unsure whether he would read it. Perhaps he'd ask George and Gail to read it and tell him about it. As he approached the end of his driveway and got off his bike, he noticed a small red automobile parked on the gravel. Miss DeWitt was seated on his steps, texting on her phone. Tyson felt a bit eager. It was Miss DeWitt. Then a wave of grief struck him. He understood why she was here, but his heart was shouting no. It meant saying no to a brief connection with Miss DeWitt. It was saying no to everything meaningless. If Leona and Felicity returned, there would no longer be empty connections that left him alone. After losing Imani, he lost his life plan as well. Now he had to start afresh. That would not happen if he kept switching from person to person. He took a long breath to calm himself before pushing his bike ahead, walking toward the steps. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up and smiled, but the grin disappeared when she saw his face. "You promised." She spoke with a pout. He paused a few feet from her. "I know, and I apologize. I just can't anymore." Her eyes expanded. "You cannot do it." He blinked in astonishment and laughed. "No, that's not it. This is my heart," she gasped. "Sorry, I don't have any physical problems. It is emotional. I can't keep experiencing sensations only for the thrill. I'm no longer young. I should be considering retirement and settling down with a spouse." He held her gaze. "That is not part of your plan." She shook her head sadly. You have a terrific life ahead of you, full with fun and excitement. I just won't be a part of it. I lost the person I wanted to settle down with. Now. I need to start over. I apologize for breaking our pledge." She moved closer to hug him, and he hugged her back. "I cannot say I am not disappointed, but I understand." As they parted ways, the young woman took a stride towards her car before coming to a halt. When Tyson and she observed a woman standing at the driveway's entrance, shyly observing them, she blushed and clasped her fists. "I could know someone who is interested in spending those years with you." Tyson could not breathe. He was worried that if he did, the moment would pass and the vision would be gone. Her wavy golden hair fell past her shoulders. Her face was recognizable, yet it had evolved with time, sunlight, and wind. The freckles on her cheeks and nose indicated that she had spent time outside. Her browned skin proved it. The vision wore a lovely sundress and sandals. Her arms were toned and tanned, too. She must have done some strenuous physical job outside. Ashley? Oh my God, Tyson managed to say. He took a step forward, then another, till he saw her approach him. He moved forward and hugged her hard, feeling her realism, presence, and warmth. "Tyson is too tight," she squeaked. He hurriedly laid her down and attempted to stare into her eyes, but his eyes would not concentrate. He rubbed at them, but they remained fuzzy, and his cheeks felt damp. "I am crying," he whispered with amazement. A warm voice full of emotion giggled. "So am I. Ashley, are you really here?" He quickly pulled his shirt over his head and used it to wipe his eyes. Ashley said with awe, "You've changed so much since I last saw you." A second voice expressed disappointment. He eventually blinked, his vision clear, and looked at the beauty in front of him. She had aged, yet she remained the most beautiful sight he had seen in a long time. He noticed the pout on Mr. Witt's face. "Stephanie, I would like you to meet Ashley Dunning.Collins," Ashley corrected. He nodded. "Sorry, Ashley Collins is my best buddy. This is Stephanie DeWitt. She used to be one of my students and a possible girlfriend," Ashley asked, smiling. "I was really near." Stephanie kept her finger and thumb very close together. She sighed as she touched Tyson's chest. She smiled as she told Ashley what dreams are made of. "Nice to meet you, Ashley. Enjoy. She's a lucky woman." Her tone did not convey any ill will. Stephanie climbed into her little sporty automobile, while Tyson and Ashley headed to the steps with a single honk. Stephanie drove away. Tyson watched her depart and then turned to Ashley with a bewildered expression. "How did you arrive here?" Ashley offered a hesitant smile. "I leased a car and followed her as she drove into your driveway. I drove past and parked next door. I waited in my car, watching her sit on the steps. Because you were not home. When you arrived, I crept out and listened from behind the bushes. I was worried that you could have a new girlfriend. I do not. I do not have anyone." "Well, George Haley is still a friend." He glanced at her again, excitement pouring through him. She was back. "Should I move my car?" she asked. "Oh, if you want, but Barbara will not be returning for a week," he replied cheerfully. "Later, though." "Should we go in?" Ashley inquired, admiring his cheerful smile. "Of course. Where are my manners?" "Please come inside," Tyson said, shaking himself. He hurried up the steps and unlocked the door for her. When she entered, he ran down the stairs, picked up his bike, and placed it next to the door. "May I get you something to drink?" he asked. "Water would be great," she suggested. She settled into the living room sofa and gazed around. Tyson instantly grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen. He handed it to her and remarked, "I can't believe you're here." "What a surprise." He sat next her. "I figured you wouldn't want to see me again." "What I did that night was very wrong," she abruptly revealed. She shook her head sadly. "I went away to Italy to spend time with my aunt at her vineyard. She helped me divorce Franklin from there. I stayed apart from everyone. I felt so humiliated." Tyson took her hand. "Ashley, there was nothing to forgive. I understood what you were going through. I loved you too, but I was with Imani." Ashley nodded. "I sincerely apologize for not being there for you when she passed. I had no idea Mom had died until Miss Caliber found me at my aunt's vineyard." "Is Sydney Caliber a journalist?" Tyson inquired, shocked. Ashley nodded. "Her editor assigned her to find me for a piece she was writing. She's an excellent investigator since the connection between my last name and my aunt's is difficult to find. and only in a few locations in rural Italy. She told me what happened after I left. I sobbed a lot that night. I felt like I had let down my dearest buddy again. Tyson kissed her hand. You did not fail me because you didn't know. I missed you so much. But I realized you needed to leave the place that damaged you. Tears filled her eyes. I've never wanted to get away from you. I believed I had to safeguard your marriage. I had no idea you were genuinely alone. Did you mean what you said on the driveway? Will you spend your life with me? Happy tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes. Oh, Tyson. Yes. Then his lips met hers. He kissed her for the second time in their lives. However, they were now moving beyond friendship to anything more. It was far better than they expected. She raised her hands, buried them in his hair while he gently supported her face so he could kiss her deeply. Ashley sighed pleasantly and kissed her. She remembered the short kiss from years ago and how he had pulled away. Now he was hers. There was no hesitancy. All you need is to be close. He took her up in his arms and carried her to his bedroom, gently placing her on the bed. He lay next her and kissed her again, gently caressing her lips and memorizing every aspect about them. Tyson expected this to happen when he returned from Europe. While there, he understood how much he missed and needed her. He came back full of optimism. But hearing that she had married made him realize how selfish he had been. I apologize, he abruptly spoke. What? Ashley inquired in confusion. I traveled to Europe to study and didn't tell you how I felt about you beforehand. I felt I had all the time in the world and didn't consider your feelings. I adored you, but I was too full of myself. We were young and foolish. I was afraid of your intelligence and turned to Franklin. I felt I had control over his career. I convinced myself that was enough. You saw how that turned out. At least you've discovered love. Ashley said, I was happy for you. I loved her, but for her it wasn't enough. Perhaps she didn't like how I looked. I was somewhat overweight back then. Maybe I was being selfish as usual and she felt ignored. Tyson confessed, feeling humiliated. If she had not told you what was wrong, how would you know and correct it? Ashley inquired, standing up for him. Tyson kissed her again, and Ashley happily returned the kiss. They laid their heads together to gather their breath. Ashley, I've missed you so much. I love you, he said, spilling out his emotions. I adore you too. I believe I've loved you my entire life, she said. Why are men so clueless? He whispered, we can't see what's right in front of us. Do you see me now? She asked quietly. Yes, Ashley Collins, I swear that my heart will always be with you. Will you promise me the same thing with my whole heart? She replied. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Tyson said, marry me, with excitement. Yes, she exclaimed as they kissed again. When they took a step back from the kiss, they were both short of breath. Are you going to be with me, or will we just kiss all night? She inquired with a cheeky smile. Smiling, Tyson got up on his knees on the bed and helped Ashley get up as well. He slipped his shorts down, and she slid her dress over her head. He paused to admire her fit body. Whatever she was doing in the vineyard was keeping her in top form. He reflected on how much Christy looked like Ashley when she was younger. Full breasts with lovely contours. You're stunningly gorgeous. She grinned as she unfastened her bra. Not as attractive as the young blonde and the images in your living room. He grinned, so she noticed Christy's images. Oh, you mean the one who resembles you in your 20s? Yes, Ashley replied with a sense of jealousy. Tyson laughed at her expression. Her name is Christy Taylor. We came close, but it's over now. George Haley referred her to me for math tutoring, and we got along great. She assisted me in taking the first steps toward improving my life. He gazed at Ashley with love in his eyes. You are my ideal representation of beauty. Before she could respond, he pulled her in for another kiss. His hand went down her bare back, eliciting a faint whimper from under her panties. He slid his lips to her jaw, discovering her ears were extremely sensitive. She gasped and clutched to him. He softly squeezed her again. Oh God, you cannot be serious. After being with Christy, you find me appealing, she said. Please do not judge me based on what I deem lovely. Christy is wonderful, but I prefer you. You're everything I hoped for, he insisted. When she saw he was serious, she relaxed. Thank you. I also appreciate having your hands on me. He gave her another squeeze, making her laugh at his teasing expression. She ran her fingertips across his chest. I can't get over how fit you are. The woman today was correct. I am an extremely fortunate woman, Ashley teased. Let me show you how fortunate you are, Tyson remarked with a grin in his eye. He instantly lifted her and placed her back on the bed. She gasped at how easily he moved her, then moaned as his lips touched her breasts. He kissed and massaged her until she thought she'd go insane when he eventually moved on. She rested on the mattress, smiling and catching her breath. Then she noticed he was moving lower. Her eyes expanded. Tyson! Tyson, what are you doing? She gasped. He merely smiled and continued down. Oh my God, Ashley yelled out, her hands gripping his head. His mouth was performing actions she had only heard about. Oh, Tyson, what? Oh, very wonderful. Oh my God. She stammered, as amazing sensations rushed through her body. She adored it. Her release was rapidly increasing. Her body trembled. Tears poured down her cheeks as she reflected on how much she loved him and how good he made her feel. Tyson added 2 fingers to the mix, exploring and teasing her inner barriers, and her body arched off the bed. She screamed as she reached the pinnacle of ecstasy. Tyson carefully brought her down from her high until she laid against the bed, smiling. When she opened her eyes, he was next to her, softly brushing her cheek. Was that a new experience? Tyson asked quietly. She nodded weakly. Yes, I've never felt anything like that. She exhaled. That is really unfortunate. I enjoy doing it. So prepare, he added with a grin. Her eyes widened as she considered how often he did that. Bliss, I wish I could do something for you as well, but I lack the necessary energy, she pouted. I'm also new to this, so you'll have to be patient as I practice. Tyson grinned. I enjoy enthusiastic learners. She smiled mischievously at him. I will be your best student. Tyson's eyes gleamed with laughter. Teacher, I have a need that only you can fill, a vacancy that requires someone exceptional. I've been dreaming throughout my entire life, even while I wasn't aware of it, she said with an innocent expression. It was too much for Tyson. He kissed her again. When he backed away, she gazed up at him. That was nice. She exhaled. But I need more. I need a specific piece of you here. She spread her legs, and he moved over her. He pressed against her, and they both gasped. This felt like crossing another line, and they were fully prepared. He walked up and down until he was soaked from her, then moved forward to join her. Tyson. Yes. She exhaled. Is this real? He whispered. Don't wake me up, she said, smiling. They moved together until Tyson rested completely on Ashley, and she felt his entire body. This feels wonderful. She exhaled. Ashley, I love you, Tyson remarked, gazing into her eyes. Her blue eyes filled with love met his, and she softly held and kissed him. He moved in and out as they kissed passionately. The intensity of the moment made kissing impossible, so she slid her hands to his hips to draw him closer. He began moving faster. Tyson, I love you so much, she said softly as her body shook. Ashley had achieved her peak immediately before Tyson, and he felt a warm rush fill her. It's never been so good. I am very delighted we discovered each other. Ashley groaned. Tyson could only nod. His eyes welled up with happy tears. He couldn't remember ever being so joyful. They rolled gently onto their sides but remained attached. Tyson relaxed, but remained inside her. Neither of them wanted their connection to stop. This is how they fell asleep in the early morning hours. Tyson awoke on his back, with Ashley cuddling against him. It felt natural and appropriate. He looked at the foot of the bed and Imani smiled at him. He looked at Ashley to ensure she was sleeping. He then returned his gaze to Imani, filled with optimism. Now, he inquired gently. She nodded. Goodbye, my love. Then she was gone. This time, for good. Tyson felt lighter than he has in years. It was as if something heavy inside him had finally been lifted, and he felt like he could float away. But he refused, because Ashley's love grounded him. Epilogue. Devon Wilson dropped the passenger window of his Porsche Carrera as he accelerated north on the Pacific Coast Highway. He flung an empty rum bottle from the window. It crashed against the rock edge, and on the seat next to him was a copy of the New Yorker magazine. Someone from his former hospital had sent it to him. Devon became enraged after reading a story about Tyson Kane. The title read, "The Math Genius Making Waves in Education." Devon had to flee and hide with a friend in California, whilst Tyson was acclaimed as a hero both at home and abroad. Where was the justice in the first? Tyson steals Devon's love. Then he shapes up his figure, and ladies begin chasing after him. Devon became increasingly enraged after seeing images in the magazine of his childhood sweetheart married into high society. Tyson flaunted his lean body in only his underpants, posing in his office at school. The photographs left very little to the imagination. Devon was profoundly saddened after seeing a picture of Imani. She was just perfect. Devon was briefly mentioned in the article, but not by name. He was just another man. It's barely worth mentioning. Tyson's new wife was assisting him with his PTSD, and they even went on a vacation to Tuscany, Italy. Tyson was treated as a celebrity in Europe, too. As Devon screamed in wrath, his headache worsened, exacerbated by the alcohol. He looked for his other bottle in the passenger seat. It had presumably fallen into the footwell. The car drifted to the shoulder, and he wrenched the wheel straight to get back into the lane. The burst of excitement sharpened his thoughts, but the headache became worse. That was also Tyson's fault. Devon's face was damaged, and he suffered from continuous discomfort as a result. Devon couldn't work and was surviving on insurance and savings. Devon knew what he needed to do. He was about to settle the score. A friend had borrowed him a large gun, and he was returning to the college town to put a stop to it. Tyson did not deserve to live while Imani was away. Tyson's new wife did not deserve to live either. Only Imani should live. "If only I hadn't fallen in love with her," he moaned. "Why did you abandon me?" he choked out. "I apologize," Devon whispered softly. He focused on the seat next to him, and there she was, both beautiful and sad. "I've really missed you," he murmured. "I understand," she replied. "Are you returning to be with me?" he inquired, sounding pathetic. "No, I adore Tyson. Fuck, I loathe him. He is going to pay. Both will pay." "Devon, do you love me?" she asked. He admired her perfection next to him. He couldn't look away. His automobile was driving 120 when it collided with a rocky outcrop on a tight curve. The right front fender ripped out, causing the automobile to drift left into oncoming traffic. A fast Lamborghini Huracan had barely a split second to respond. Instead of colliding head-on, it struck Devon's car on the underside, throwing it over the guardrail. Devon felt lightheaded as the car flew into the sea below. He looked to his right and found Imani with sad eyes watching him. "The ocean wants you," she said. Tyson walked out of the lake and ran his hands over his hair, shaking off the cold water. He had swum more than halfway across today before returning with his greatest effort ever. He moved along the lawn toward the patio, feeling that someone was observing him. Barbara sat on her roof terrace with binoculars, watching. Tyson did not mind too much. He didn't intend to change his habits for her. Ashley had another set of eyes. She grinned cheerfully as Tyson approached. She added, "You look like a powerful sea warrior," with a teasing grin. Tyson laughed and accepted the towel she handed as he approached the little table and seats. "Is this for your upcoming book?" he asked. Ashley nodded. She had been writing extensively since they married. Tyson had relocated the patio furniture closer to the home. This way, Barbara and their neighbors couldn't see them from their rooftops. They could only be seen if someone was out on the lake in a boat, which no one was. Tyson dried his hair while Ashley leaned forward to kiss him softly. She was getting better, and Tyson enjoyed her excitement. He knew he wouldn't be around long once she got into a groove. "Ashley, you are going to make me feel fantastic," he added softly. She grinned cheerfully and hugged him. Tyson was overcome with emotion and barely managed to stay on his feet. "My gosh, you are fantastic," he sighed when she looked up at him. He leaned down and kissed her tenderly. She said, "It's your reward for working so hard on your fitness." He stood back up. He stroked the towel over the remainder of his body as she stared with delight. Then he changed into his robe and they headed inside to start their breakfast. They prepared the meal together and ate at the breakfast bar. They had no urgent affairs to attend to because it was Saturday. After cleaning the kitchen, they took a shower together, kissed, and planned a relaxing day. Tyson intended to go for a ride in the afternoon. The pair was walking towards the living room when they heard a knock on the front door. "Are we expecting anyone this morning?" Ashley asked. Tyson shakes his head. He went to open the door and Ashley walked to the kitchen to see what they could make for dinner. Tyson opened the door and froze. He was speechless. "Who is at the door?" Ashley called out. That ended his silence. "It's Christy," and he stood back to allow the young woman enter. She tried not to cry. Ashley joined them and gasped. On Christy's hip was a tiny boy, possibly 18 months old. He possessed Christy's beautiful blue eyes, but his other characteristics resembled Tyson's. Even his hair is frizzy. "Is this why you didn't attend the wedding?" Tyson asked quietly. Christy nodded slowly. Ashley recovered first. "He is wonderful. What is his name?" Christy grinned in relief. "Aiden, can I hold him?" the older woman inquired. Christy nodded and handed the boy to Ashley, who smiled broadly. The toddler grinned back warmly. "Oh, wow, he's as charming as his father." Ashley replied with a smile to Tyson, who remained still. "Why don't you two talk outside while I entertain him?" Tyson and Christy nodded and went to the patio, while Ashley looked for some toys to play with. They sat down and Tyson spoke first. "How would you spell his name?" "Aiden." Christy spoke fast. "So my father's name," Tyson explained. "Why haven't you told me?" Christy had a forlorn expression on her face. "When I went that weekend, I was going through a difficult moment. I told you about my guy, but we broke up months ago. I wanted to be with you, but I also wanted to pursue my job. I made terrible decisions. I stopped taking birth control after we broke up, so I was fertile that weekend. We made love several times, and it felt good after we talked. You helped me realize that I needed to focus on my career." She paused to collect herself before proceeding. "I wanted to take the day after pill, but I couldn't. When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew I needed to keep the baby. He's a part of you that I can maintain in my life. I could not love him more." Tyson was shocked. "Why haven't you told me?" he repeated. Christy shakes her head. I did not want you to feel obligated to do anything. You made it apparent that we were not destined to be together. I never said I didn't desire you. But let us be honest. I'm in my 60s and you're in your 20s. You must find someone to grow old with. You're still young and have a lot ahead of you. Be patient and keep your heart open." She nodded, but her eyes welled with tears. Tyson's heart wrenched for her. He opened his arms and she promptly sat on his lap, wailing as he held her close. They remained like this for a time until Christy stopped crying. Christy spoke quietly. "I always feel better in your arms. You will find someone to hold and love you even more. I will always be your friend and support you, but the rest now belongs to Ashley." They sat silently, relishing the warmth of holding each other. Then Christy stood and returned to her chair. "Why inform me now?" Tyson asked. Christy smiled nervously and lifted her chin. "Do you remember when I mentioned that my company was expanding into Europe?" He nodded. "I couldn't accept the job before since I was expecting Aiden." She said this while taking a deep breath. "The job has come up again, and it's no longer just in Europe. It's all around the globe. They want me for it, but I'll need to travel extensively. I could only return home 1 week out of every 4. The compensation is more than double what I earn currently, and the experience would be enormous. I can't turn it down." "So what about Aiden?" "I can't take him with me. I do not have somebody to look after him. I came to present him to my folks. They had no idea about him either." Tyson's eyebrows rose. "You haven't told your parents? How did they respond? Daddy isn't talking to me, and Mom is unhappy. She missed the beginning of his life, but she is thrilled to have a grandchild. Aiden has won her over as well." She exhaled. "Mom claims Papa simply needs time. She believes he will come around, but I know he can keep a grudge." Tyson nodded. "Were you going to ask them to care for him?" "No, I would want to ask if you could. Aiden needs his father." Tyson's eyes widened. "I've never been a father before. I've never been a mother before, and I had to go it alone." She raised her hands in surrender. "I know it was my decision, but I need assistance now." Tyson recognized that asking for help was difficult for her. "This is not a decision that I can make alone. Ashley must agree to. Let's go in." They returned to the house and heard the small boy's delighted laughs. They discovered him playing on the living room floor with Ashley, who flashed them a wide smile. "He's such a bright little boy." She motioned for Tyson to sit on the floor next to her. He did, and Christy sat on his opposite side. Aiden immediately climbed Tyson's legs and reached up. Tyson helped the boy stand, and small hands grasped his hair. Aiden babbled eagerly as he played with the hair, then turned to his mother and grabbed a fistful of his own. Christy smiled, tears in her eyes, and nodded at her son. "Yes, he has your hair. He's your father." "Duh," Aiden asked. Christy was stunned by his remark, and more tears flowed. "Yes, Daddy." Tyson was amazed. He never imagined he'd have children, especially one as amazing as this. Perhaps he was biased. He stared at Ashley. "Christy got a large job offer. She's asking if we could watch after Aiden while she travels." "Yes," Ashley replied right away. Tyson blinked with amazement. "It will take up a lot of our time." He stared at Christy. "How long will you remain at this new job?" She gazed in his eyes. 2, 5 years. However, if everything goes well, it may take longer. I'll spend all of my free time with Aiden." Tyson nodded and returned his gaze to Ashley. "This home is not set up for another person." Ashley snorted. "That's an easy repair. The spare room that we converted into my writing studio can once again be used as a bedroom. We can complete it in a few hours." "Where are you staying tonight?" she questioned Christy. "I was planning to acquire a hotel room in town," Christy explained. "No, you may stay here." Ashley was excited. She looked at Tyson. "Christy and I can go to town, buy a bed, and get it delivered today." "Oh, how about a cot for Aiden? I keep his crib in my vehicle. I brought all of his belongings." "Actually," Christy conceded. Tyson raised his eyebrows in astonishment as Aiden reached for them. It ached a little. Ashley's face brightened up again. "Great. Are you certain? I am not asking too much. You just got married, and I'm asking you to look after my child," Christy stated. Ashley took Christy's hand. "I couldn't have my own children, but I had always desired kids. Now I am with the man I should have been with all along. But it is too late. Aiden, your arrival is well-timed." Ashley could see Christy's concern and attempted to alleviate it. "Do not get me wrong, I am not trying to be his mother. It will always be you. I just have a lot of motherly affection that I've never expressed." Christy cried happy tears again. "Thank you." The two women hugged before hurrying into the spare bedroom to make preparations. Tyson and Aiden were left in the living room to stare at each other. Tyson smiled at his son, who still had his small hands in his hair. Aiden laughed at his grin and hopped on his legs. Duh, duh, duh. A strange sensation swept through him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He instantly realized he would give his life to defend this tiny boy and do whatever it took to make him happy. He drew Aiden into an embrace, nuzzling his neck and ears. The boy giggled. Tyson kissed the boy's pudgy cheeks. Little arms curled around his neck, and he received a kiss on the cheek in exchange. Tyson looked into the spare bedroom and noticed Ashley and Christy watching him. They both seemed happy. Tyson raised his eyebrow at Ashley, who noticed his expression and looked at Christy. Christy's face grew scarlet as she met Ashley's gaze. Ashley remarked, "Let's go see what's in your minivan," guiding Christy to the front door. "We should discuss the regulations now that you have allowed me to be so involved in raising your son." Then they went outside, away from Tyson's shocked ears. Tyson returned his gaze to Aiden, who attempted to appear as startled as Tyson felt. "My first lesson to you. Always let the ladies handle the transactions." Aiden could not help but laugh at Tyson's solemn expression. "Is it too soon for this lesson?" Tyson inquired, and Aiden responded with a smile. Tyson added, "Happy wife, happy life." Aiden nodded again. Tyson laughed with delight. "Son, I believe this is the beginning of something truly great. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired.